Chapter 36. Zhu Yao once again returned to Jade Forest Mountain. Same location, same room, same master. Zhu Yao felt like crying. Recalling the situation earlier, she could not help but give his face another kick. Nonsense. Yu Yan calmly pulled down her calf and placed the little person, who could not even stand steadily, onto the bed. Seeing that she was restlessly crawling around, and just as she was about to crawl off the bed, he had no choice but to carry her back onto the bed, and repeatedly carried her several times. Yu Yan looked at this naughty little dumpling, and for a moment, he did not know what to do. He had never taken care of a child before, let alone one who did not even know how to speak. The only experience he had in taking care of someone was that stupid disciple of his, who had already passed away. Recalling this, Yu Yan was a little sad. He had waited for 10,000 years, and finally took in a disciple after much difficulty. He taught her carefully and took good care of her. However, his disciple was killed by a fox demon the first time she went out to experience the world. The moment his disciple was injured, he knew, and rushed over with his fastest speed. Although with his cultivation, as long as her soul did not leave the vicinity to reincarnate, he could still save her. However, the strange thing was, no matter how he cast his arts, his disciple did not show any signs of waking up. And the divine sense he left on his personal succeeding disciple's forehead did not dissipate. This was an extremely illogical thing. A person's death was like an extinguished lamp. Other than soul-summoning arts, nothing else could possibly be effective on a dead person, unless she was not dead. Today, he was merely passing by the mortal realm by chance, when he suddenly sensed his divine sense. When he rushed over, he saw this baby girl who was wrapped up like a white dumpling, and was even crawling around, being chased by a group of servants. Usually, when a soul reincarnated, it would take at least 1,000 years, and at most 10,000 years. Hence, his first reaction was to seize a body and reincarnate. However, seizing a body required the cultivation of a nascent soul stage practitioner. No matter how heaven-defying that stupid disciple of his was, it was impossible for her to form her nascent soul within a few days. Furthermore, with her stupid personality, even if she was dead, it was impossible for her to lay her hands on a baby girl. He concealed his figure, and cast an art to make mortals automatically ignore his and the baby's existence. After carefully inspecting her sea of consciousness, her soul and body were very closely linked, and it did not seem like she had been seized. Hence, the words of taking her in as his disciple came out just like that, and he even impulsively brought her back. But what should he do now? Looking at Xiao Tuanzi, who had already started to climb on top of him, and was even pulling his hand into her mouth, he instantly understood something. Hungry, Zhu Yao raised her head and glanced at him. She simply wanted to bite him out of anger, but she had forgotten that she did not have any teeth. Moreover, Master's hand was so hard that his gums hurt. Be good and sit down. I'll go find you something to eat. After saying that, he walked out. After a while, he came back with big and small bowls of food. Zhu Yao looked back at him with her expressionless face. Was it really scientific to ask an infant to eat rice? His gums hurt even more. You don't like it? Seeing that she turned a blind eye to the food, a certain master was troubled. This disciple seemed to be harder to raise than the previous one. Zhu Yao had already begun to climb down the bed speechlessly, and was once again mercilessly pulled back by a certain master. Yu Yan raised her round body, looked left and right, as though he was considering just what he should feed her. In the end, he let out a long sigh, carried her tightly, and flew towards the main mountain. It was better to ask someone with rich experience in accepting disciples. Hence, Reverend ZMO, who had rich experience in accepting disciples, was once again shocked by his ancestral grand-uncle, who suddenly appeared in his room. Ancestral grand-uncle, you're back? Ever since little Martial Uncle's death, Ancestral grand-uncle had changed from his 10,000-year otaku nature, and often traveled outside. Why did he suddenly return now? And he was even carrying in his hands. Ancestral grand-uncle, this infant is? Could it be? ZMO instantly imagined a huge scene. Disciple, Yu Yan lightly said, shattering ZMO's imagination. ZMO was even more shocked. Ancestral granduncle, you accepted another disciple? After pondering for a moment, it was understandable. Jade Forest Mountain still needed a successor. However, he did not expect that he would find another disciple with the lightning spirit vein so quickly. That's not right. That child did not even look a year old. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be possible to test his spirit vein. Yu Yan completely did not have the intention to explain, and simply stuffed Zhu Yao into Zimo's embrace. She's hungry. Ah. Zimo was stunned on the spot. If she's hungry, why are you looking for me? It's not like he could feed the child. Ancestral granduncle I. Just as Zimo was about to explain, Yu Yan coldly glanced at him. That gaze clearly said, if you don't deal with her, then I will deal with you. Reverend Zimo trembled, and silently swallowed the remaining half of his words. He carefully inspected the infant in his hands. It was a white and tender ball. Its facial features were extremely exquisite, and it was especially obedient. It did not cry or make a fuss, and simply stared unblinkingly at him with its large, round eyes. Zimo was instantly melted by her cuteness. So cute. She was completely different from ancestral granduncle. He really wanted to snatch her over. Cuckoo. Ancestral granduncle. This child is still young, and should not have weaned yet. However, you can feed her some food like rice paste. Although he had the thought of snatching her over, due to his identity as an ancestral granduncle, he silently endured it. Carrying the child tightly with one hand, he took out 2 gunny sacks from the storage pouch at his side. This disciple has 2 sacks of spiritual rice here. They're softer than regular rice, and they're perfect for. Yu Yan nodded. Without being courteous, with a wave of his hand, he stored the 2 sacks of spiritual rice into his own storage ring. Alright, he was already used to having his things snatched away. Just as he was thinking of how to earn it back, a red-clothed woman suddenly walked in from the door. Senior Marshal Brother, the batch you mentioned back then. The person who came was precisely the Medicine Mountain Lord Hong Cho. Seeing Yu Yan in the room, she was startled for a moment, and then hurriedly bowed. This disciple greets ancestral granduncle. Yu Yan nodded, and did not have the intention to bother with her. However, Hong Cho immediately saw the infant in Zimo's hands, and her eyes instantly shone. Whose child is this? She looks so cute. Probably because women were born with a fondness for children. Before Zimo could even react, Hong Cho had already carried Zhu Yao from his embrace. Pinching her little arms and legs, she had an extremely fond expression. Even Zhu Yao herself was a little shocked. In her previous life, did this woman not hate her to death? Yet she was revealing such an expression right now. The difference was too great, and she was completely unable to react. A domineering elder sister turning into a lowly. That was too unethical. Senior Marshal Brother, could this child be sister-in-laws? Although it was very hard for a person who conducted a dual practitioner to get pregnant, it was not impossible. She did not expect that after not seeing her for a short while, she would have a daughter. Of course not, Zimo retorted. As expected, he was not the only one who would have such a perverted thought. She's not. When Hong Cho heard this, she became even happier, and her eyes were filled with excitement. No, just give this child to me. I will take her in as my disciple. Chapter 37. Ahem, Junior Marshal's sister. This is Grand Marshal Uncle's new disciple. Looking at Yu Yan, whose killing intent had already begun to surge, Zimo had no choice but to remind the woman who was hugging the child and not letting go. Hong Cho was stunned for a moment. She turned her head to look at Granduncle Master, who had an unfriendly expression. She still didn't give up, and tightened her grip on Xiao Tuanzi in her arms. So you are Granduncle Master's disciple. What is your name? Yu Yan was startled for a moment. After pondering for a moment, he said, she'll naturally follow my surname, Yu, and her first name is Tu. His second disciple after all. Tuanzi and Zhu Yao instantly felt like scratching his face. You're an idiot. Your entire family is an idiot. Yo little doll, you're acting like a spoiled child. Looking at Tuanzi waving her little hands in her arms, Hong Cho liked her even more, and couldn't help kissing her little face. Zhu Yao, whose face was smeared with saliva. But this baby is too young. She hasn't been weaned yet. It just so happens that I've caught a spirit beast that's currently breastfeeding, so I can feed her. Should I help Grand Marshal Uncle take care of it for a few years? Yu Yan simply raised his hand, and the little dumpling in Hong Chao's embrace automatically flew back into his embrace. He coldly replied, "No need." Hong Chou sighed in frustration, but she still didn't give up. She looked at Xiao Tuanzi with shining eyes. Such a small child, he still needs milk to grow up. Zhu Yao trembled. Turning around, she buried her head into her master's embrace and forcefully wiped off the saliva on her face. There were many weird uncles and aunties in this world, and her master's place was still the safest. That's not right. Wasn't master the one who abducted her first? Yu Yan was very satisfied with his little disciple's reliance. Tidying up her clothes, he continued to speak to Hong Si. Since that's the case, send that spiritual beast over to Jade Forest Mountain tomorrow. After saying that, without waiting for their reaction, he brought his newly accepted little disciple and flew back to Jade Forest Mountain. Zhu Yao felt that she was about to turn into a pig. Every day, she would either eat and sleep or sleep and eat. Her master single-handedly took care of all her life. She ate the rice paste that he cooked, wore the clothes that he personally made, and even slept on his bed. Of course, she was the one sleeping, and her master was just meditating at the side. The only thing she couldn't stand was why did he have to bathe himself? Although she was a little brat now, babies also had a sense of shame, okay? Every day, a man would strip her naked, throw her into the water, and rub her body left and right. She was used to this kind of thing. With her expressionless face, Zhu Yao raised her head and looked at the sky. Rub with all her might. In any case, her moral integrity had pretty much fallen, and there wasn't much left. Yu Yan carried his Tuan disciple out from the water, wiped off the water stains, and as he helped her wear her clothes, he stared at her round face, his heart filled with doubts. This disciple of his was really strange. When he first brought her back, she would often throw tantrums and cry. Why was it that the more he raised her, the quieter she became? Now, let alone crying, she didn't even have any expression on her face. She would only stare at the sky with a pair of round eyes. He even suspected that there was some kind of injury on her face that he couldn't detect. That was why he had facial paralysis. The moment Yu Yan loosened his grip, Zhu Yao, who was neatly dressed, crawled towards the bottle of spiritual beast milk. Hugging it, she gulped it down in a few mouthfuls. Alright, now that she was full, she could sleep. Her head tilted, and she laid on the ground. In any case, she no longer had any moral integrity, so she decided to peacefully be a pig. Nanny Dad Yu Yan sighed. Carrying the little dumpling on the ground, he walked into the room, gently placed her on the bed, and covered her with a blanket. Thinking that the dumpling on the bed did not have any signs of waking up anytime soon, he turned around and left the room. The young spiritual beast that Hong Chou sent over had already been weaned. Once the mother beast had passed the breastfeeding period, it would no longer produce milk. He had to catch another one. The routine of an infant was very strange. Even if Zhu Yao was an old auntie in her heart, she was still unable to control her body's needs. When Zhu Yao woke up, it was already midnight. The room was empty, and she could not see her master's figure. Zhu Yao waited for a while, but she still did not see her master. Hence, she decided to crawl out of the room to take a look. Although she currently had small arms and legs, she could still crawl rather quickly. A moment later, she crawled out of the courtyard. It was very quiet outside, and she could even faintly hear the cries of insects. Her surroundings were very dark, but strangely, she could clearly see everything in her surroundings. This feeling was exactly the same as when she built her foundation. Could it be that her cultivation had reincarnated along with her? Zhu Yao was a little excited. She wanted to circulate the spiritual energy in her body, only to realize that her dantian was completely empty. Basically, there was nothing she could circulate. What was this? She rejoiced for nothing. So she basically did not have any spiritual energy at all. Zhu Yao was a little defeated, as she aimlessly crawled forward. Suddenly, a claw in front of her stepped on empty air, and her body uncontrollably fell forward. Gurugulu, she rolled forward. It's over. Zhu Yao reflexively hugged into a ball, to prevent herself from getting hurt. Hence her body, which was already fat in the first place, rolled even more happily. Along the way, she even brought along quite a bit of dirt, and only when she bumped into a soft object did she finally stop. A deep male voice resounded in her ears, and in the next moment, she was carried up by someone. I picked up a little bun. The person in front of her was a white-clothed man. He had starry brows and sharp eyes, and he was even someone she was familiar with. Little wimp, Zhu Yao blurted out, however. What came out was merely a child's ya sound. She could actually roll all the way to his side. Ah, monkey poop. That's not right. Why did little wimp look different? Although he still had the same face, evidently, he was much more mature than that young and inexperienced youth from before. His facial features were even sharper, and even a short stubble could be seen on his chin. It had only been a few months since she last saw him, yet he had changed so much, right? Wang Xuji naturally did not recognize her. With a light smile, he carried her into his embrace, and casually cast a dirt removal art to clean away the dirt on her body. He then pulled out her messy hair. You sure are a cute little bun. Zhu Yao rolled her eyes at him. She simply looked a little round. How was she a bun? It's a blessing for a child to be a little round. When he was 10 years old, he still looked like a bun. What face does he have to say that about me? Humph. What, you're not convinced? Wang Xuji mischievously pinched her little cheeks. You're so round, so white and tender. If you're not a bun, what are you? Zhu Yao struggled out of his demonic claws. Humph, little wimp, remember this. When this old lady can speak again, I will strip off all of your dark history. Seeing that she clearly wanted to flare up, yet she was still desperately putting on a straight face, Wang Xuji became even happier. Feeling conscious, he helped her rub her reddened little cheeks. Alright, don't be angry, don't be angry. Senior Marshal Brother is just joking with you. It's already so late. Why is a little bun like you still running around? Zhu Yao turned her head, ignoring him. She didn't run out of there, she rolled out of there. Which mountain's disciple are you from? I will send you back. Wang Xuji asked. Chapter 38. You live in the Jade Forest Mountain? Wang Xuji was startled, and a moment later he felt relieved. I heard from Master that Ancestral Grand Master had recently taken in a disciple. So it's true. Wang Xuji's joyous mood earlier suddenly sank. His brows seemed to be frowning with countless worries, and his voice seemed to be suppressing something as well. So you're his new disciple? Heh. Do you know? I know your senior marshal's sister. We're very close. Very close. As though he was talking in his sleep, his voice grew heavier with each sentence he spoke. Zhu Yao instantly felt her heart becoming heavy as well. But he took a deep breath, as though he was suppressing something. Everyone has forgotten about her. Even your master. Ho-ho, back then, he couldn't save her, and destroyed the entire secluded melancholy forest in a fit of anger. But so what? In just 100 years, he took in another disciple, and even he has forgotten about his former disciple. Wang Xuji's hands that were hugging her tightened, as though he was trying his best to suppress his own anger, until Zhu Yao felt a little pain from his grip, and struggled uneasily. He then regained his senses, loosened his grip, and turned to smile at her. It's fine. Even if the entire world has forgotten about her, I will still remember her. I will only remember her. He took a few deep breaths, before standing up and walking towards the mountain peak. Little bun, I'll send you back. Zhu Yao did not make a sound, and simply stared fixedly at the little brat who had grown up in front of her. In front of her eyes, his miserable, sorrowful, and even slightly despairing smile constantly surfaced. She really did not expect that her death would have such a huge impact on him. All this while, she had thought that reincarnation was something that happened in the blink of an eye. But from what he said earlier, she had actually been dead for 100 years. And it had already been 100 years, yet he was still brooding over her death? She really wanted to tell him that she did not die, and that she had come back to life. However, she was basically unable to say it out loud. In the end, she simply opened her little hands, and with her little body, tightly hugged onto his neck. Little wimp, I'm back. Someone was here? The moment Yu Yin returned, he sensed the presence of a living person. He passed the warm spiritual beast milk in his hands to the dumpling who was sitting upright on the bed. With a wave of his hand, He cast a scouting mystic art and found out who it was. He frowned deeply. It was that stinky brat again. Not only did he take one of his disciples, he even wanted to take a second one. Yu Yan picked up Tuanzi, who was lying on the bed, and warned her with a serious look. Don't talk to irrelevant people in the future. Rabbit had learned bad things again. Zhu Yao's reply was, hugging the milk bottle in her hands, she splashed it all over his face. Humph. No one can say anything bad about my little rascal, not even my master. She was a child, and that was how stubborn she was. A certain master. Zhu Yao lived like a pig for exactly 4 months, and there were finally some signs of her working and resting schedule developing back to normal. This was because Taoist Master Hong Chao's visit indicated that she was about to be weaned, and that she had grown 2 teeth. Therefore, her master only fed her rice paste. She had begun to speak a few complete words, but she still couldn't complete a sentence. Of course, in a situation like this, Zhu Yao was actually very anxious. She could not speak, could not walk, and could only eat rice paste. Compared to her mental age, she was equivalent to a level 1 handicap. She really wanted to cultivate as well, but her master seemed to have forgotten his original intention of taking in a disciple, and was completely immersed in the joy of raising a daughter. Zhu Yao felt that her body was a little strange. Although there was no spiritual energy in her body, her senses were the same as when she was building her foundation. Furthermore, when she saw Wang Xuji that day, she was actually able to tell with a single glance that he was a foundation paragon. Even she herself did not know why. Wang Xuji would occasionally visit her as well, but he had never come to the mountain peak, and would simply sit on that rock in the forest. Every single time, he would bring her some things. There were things to eat, and there were things to play with, as though he was completely coaxing her like a child. Zhu Yao silently pondered. When she was able to speak, how should she laugh back at him with all her mockery? Of course, Yu Yan had his opinions, but he realized that his little disciple seemed to really like that kid. As long as he mentioned it, whatever his little disciple had in her hands, she would throw it at his face. Her temper was really bad. Although 100 years had passed, 100 years was but a blink of an eye for a practitioner. With Wang Xuji's outstanding aptitude, he should have formed his Azoth core long ago, yet he was still stuck at the foundation paragon level. She wondered how that Xiaoyi was back then. When she thought of him, Zhu Yao could not help but want to slap the label of pig teammate on his face. Back then, if he had not hesitated for a moment, she would not have needed to reincarnate either. Actually, after thinking about it carefully, she could understand why he was in a daze back then. After all, to him, possessing a mystical treasure was something that only he knew about, and his sword intent was even cultivated out because of the mystical treasure. It was his secret. However, when she suddenly roared it out like that, no one would be able to react in time, right? However, how could he hesitate in the situation back then? And there was no time for her to slowly walk over and whisper into his ear either, right? Hence, her death was really unjust. However, Wang Xuji did not think so. From the things he occasionally revealed to Zhu Yao, who was in her dumpling form, from his scattered words, she realized that he harbored deep resentment towards Xiao Yi. And he even had the intention to push all of the responsibility for Zhu Yao's death onto Xiao Yi. Furthermore, every time the topic of her was brought up, he would unconsciously look towards the southwest direction, and his eyes would be filled with resentment. Sovereign Feng Yi's cave residence was located in the southwest direction, and Xiao Yi had already gone into closed-door training to attempt his Azoth core 70 years ago. A part of the reason why Zhu Yao wanted to cultivate as soon as possible was because of Wang Xuji. In terms of scheming, luck, and cultivation, he could not compare to Xiao Yi in any one of them. She was really afraid that he would be rash and run over to fight with others. Hence, it was better for her to keep an eye on him. However, even so, Zhu Yao still did not plan to tell anyone about her resurrection. After all, resurrecting from the dead or something like that, in this world, could be considered a strange matter as well. It was very hard for people to not suspect that she had some sort of treasure. But the main point was, even she herself did not know why she did it. And when she died, That strange matter that seemed to have suddenly transmigrated into an online game made her even more unable to say it out loud. Even she herself was a little confused. For a moment, she suspected if she had transmigrated into some sort of game. However, at the very least, she had lived in this world for so many years, and the people she had met were all living humans. If this was an online game, at the very least, there would be an NPC, right? Zhu Yao let out a long sigh, and sadly began to ponder about life. And Yu Yin, who chased after her with a bowl of porridge in his hands, saw a little dumpling, who could not even sit properly. Lying on the grass, she tried her best to use her hands to support her little head, yet time and time again she slid down. Chapter 39. The two of them were immersed in their own thoughts. Suddenly, the entire sky of Ancient Hill Sect darkened, and even the surrounding spiritual energy began to gather towards the sky uncontrollably. In an instant the wind blew, and the clouds surged. Zhu Yao, who was currently trying her best to assume the pose of a thinker, was blown backwards by the wind as well, fully displaying the advantage of her dumpling figure. Just as she was about to be swept into the sky, a figure flashed in front of her eyes, and she was caught by Yu Yin, who was behind her, into a warm place. Master. Zhu Yao spat out these two words with difficulty, and casually wiped off the saliva on his face. There was no helping it, she could not control her fangs. However, Yu Yin seemed to have already gotten used to it. Casting a dirt removal art on himself, he raised his head and glanced at the strange sky. Then, he lowered his head and looked towards the southwest direction where the commotion was caused, and muttered, "Someone's forming his Azoth core." Zhu Yao seemed to have reacted in an instant, forming his Azoth core, and in that direction. Could it be that Xiaoyi? Were all the commotion caused by leveling up in the cultivation world this big? Even Ancient Hill Sect, which was filled with formations, was like this. Yu Yin frowned. He was a lightning spirit vein holder, and was especially sensitive towards heavenly lightning. The lightning pressure hidden within the clouds was extremely obvious, and if he was not wrong, it should be the 99 heavenly tribulation of forming one's Azoth core. However, why would it cause such a huge commotion? Could it be that the person forming his Azoth core was extraordinary? Before he could ponder, the commotion in the surroundings had already stopped. Immediately after, the first bolt of tribulation lightning struck down from the sky. The sky was covered by the tribulation clouds, and the tribulation lightning was like a gigantic dragon that could split the heavens and earth apart, heading straight towards the mountain peak in the southwest, and fiercely striking the person facing the tribulation. And the great mountain barrier formation of Ancient Hill Sect was activated the moment the first bolt of heavenly lightning struck down. Although the tribulation lightning would only strike the person facing the tribulation lightning contained the might of the heavens and the purest energy. It could easily injure low-ranked disciples who did not have a strong mental state. Zhu Yao stared intently at the bolts of tribulation lightning. Such a huge commotion. It was as though every single one of them could produce the loudest echo in the depths of her heart. Even her hair could not help but stand straight. So this was the tribulation lightning. As expected, it was so domineering. But why did she feel a sense of intimacy? A total of 81 bolts of tribulation lightning for forming one's Azoth core resounded, and each bolt was stronger than the last. When the 81st bolt of tribulation lightning struck down, it meant that the opponent's Azoth core had been formed. Zhu Yao clearly sensed that when the final bolt of tribulation lightning struck down, the entire Ancient Hill Sect was trembling, and even the great mountain barrier formation was shaking a little. It was finally over. Zhu Yao heaved a sigh of relief. This was the first time she had seen such a domineering scene. "Wait, it's not done yet," Yu Yin suddenly said. Zhu Yao was startled. That's not right. She was, after all, a science student, and her mathematics was pretty good. Earlier, it was clearly 81 times, wasn't it? He raised his head, and sure enough, the tribulation clouds in the sky were still condensing and not dissipating, as if they were brewing something. Could it be that the heavens were having too much fun and wanted to strike again? The male lead's treatment was indeed different. Just as he was thinking, he saw a flash of purple light in the sky. A bolt of purple lightning, that was much thicker than the one from before struck down from the sky. Zhu Yao, who had already activated her spectator mode, calmly watched on. In any case, it was not going to land on her head. Why does that bolt of lightning seem to be able to turn? Why does it feel like it's coming over here? Holy shit, it's really coming this way. Other people's tribulations had nothing to do with her. Master. Zhu Yao grabbed tightly onto her master's collar. If not because her hands were too small, she would definitely shake him a few times. Hurry and save me. Yu Yan was a little astonished as well. This was the first time he had encountered a bolt of heavenly lightning that struck the wrong target. Fortunately, his reaction was fast, and he seemed to have instantly formed a defensive barrier. It was merely an Azoth stage heavenly lightning. He could definitely boom. The bolt of lightning instantly passed through the barrier and landed straight on the two of them. Zhu Yao, who was instantly turned into charcoal, silently turned her head to look at a certain master. What happened to the most basic trust between master and disciple? A certain master who had not even retracted his hand seals earlier. It's the 9 purple heavenly lightning earlier. As though he had sensed his disciple's resentful gaze, Yu Yan explained a little awkwardly. He had never expected that this lightning tribulation was actually a lightning tribulation that only a demigod stage practitioner would have. The difference between the 9 purple heavenly lightning and a normal lightning tribulation was that it was infallible and could penetrate all mystic arts and defenses. It could strike anyone it wanted to, and its might was 100 times stronger than a normal lightning tribulation. He had miscalculated just now, but if he had not hugged her and blocked most of the impact, it would not have been as simple as being burnt. He just couldn't understand why the god's trial of the completion level would have 9 bolts of lightning, and why it would strike the wrong person. At the same time, he casted a dirt removal spell on his disciple, which had already turned into a black ball, and bleached it white. He looked up at the sky. Such a strange tribulation lightning. It's clear that the person facing the tribulation has an astonishing destiny. It will definitely cause a phenomenon in the world. Master, are you sure you're not trying to change the topic? Zhu Yao glared at him resentfully, before raising her head to look at the sky. The sky was still very dark, but it was no longer as terrifying as before. Everything had returned to normal, and in the middle, there were specks of light falling down and slowly converging. The so-called phenomenon of the heavens and earth referred to people who had great opportunities, great luck, and great fortune. This kind of person was usually favored by heaven and earth. When they triggered a lightning tribulation for the first time, the sky would display an abnormal image. The rarer the image, the more extraordinary the person would be in the future. However, it was said that this phenomenon only occurred in ancient times. As expected, her master was right. The specks of light that were converging slowly took shape, and not even a moment later, they converged into a shape. Zhu Yao looked at the sky with widened eyes. That was actually a dragon, a gigantic white dragon, a dragon that she had only seen in books. The gigantic dragon danced and rolled in the sky, as though it could ascend to the heavens and dive into the earth in an instant, even flying towards her. The hell, it's really flying towards her. Please, aren't you the phenomenon of someone forming their Azoth core? Why did you run to the wrong side? In addition, Inconstant, who had been so domineering and mighty just a moment ago, was now hopping over in their direction. And while flying, it's also awa. What's the meaning of that? Zhu Yao instantly recalled the blurry heavenly lightning, and reflexively shouted out, "Don't come over." That dragon actually stopped in midair with a kacha sound. It pitifully glanced at her, and let out a pitiful woo sound. For a moment, Zhu Yao could not find her chin. Are you a dog or a dragon? The white dragon seemed to understand why she didn't want it to come closer. Finally, it turned around and hopped away. Its figure became fainter and fainter, and finally disappeared into the sky. The thunderclouds that had been condensing for a few hours also slowly dissipated. After a while, the sky was clear again. Zhu Yao. Yu Yan. After standing stiffly for a moment, a certain master slowly lowered his head to look at his little disciple in his hands. Zhu Yao face-bombed. Don't ask me. I don't know what's going on either. A moment later. Yu Wang. Your sister's desire. Ah. Hearing this, Yu Yan gently raised the corner of his lips. In an instant, it was as though he had broken through the ice and was reborn. As long as you're back. Chapter 40. Conditioned reflexes were really life-threatening things, because they would occasionally make you say the wrong things, do the wrong things, and reveal the wrong avatar. Zhu Yao's avatar, because of the words she blurted out due to her conditioned reflex, was unscrupulously ripped off by a certain master. She covered herself in the blanket, and was too ashamed to face anyone. Reason? He pulled out his stupid disciple, who was trying to hide herself in the blanket, and forcefully pulled her out. That unexpected lightning tribulation yesterday made him suddenly recall the spiritual energy violence when his stupid disciple was breaking through to foundation. Hence, he called out in suspicion, but he never expected that it was really her. Zhu Yao tried her best to squeeze out a pitiful expression. Unfortunately, the side effects of facial paralysis caused her to be unable to squeeze out any other expressions other than facial paralysis. She could only wave her two small hands. Master Father. Yu Yan's expression did not change, as he stared straight at her. Evidently, acting cute was useless. I don't know either. Zhu Yao lowered her head and played with her fingers. I became like this after I woke up, and then Master, you came. Seeing her wronged look, Yu Yan instantly believed her completely. A moment later, as though he had recalled something, his brows furrowed again. Why didn't you tell your master right from the start? Zhu Yao lowered her head even lower, as she attempted to curl herself into a real ball. You don't believe Master? Of course not. Zhu Yao fiercely raised her head, and then shook it with all her might. It's your master's fault. Yu Yan frowned deeply, and reached out his hand to stroke her head. I didn't protect you well. It's normal for you to not believe me. That day when he saw her corpse, he felt anger for the first time, to the point where he lost control and destroyed the entire secluded melancholy forest. But even so, he was still unable to save his disciple's life. He was not a competent master. No. Zhu Yao was a little anxious. Back then, her master was not even present, and distant water could not put out a nearby fire. It was completely unrelated to him. As for why she did not reveal her identity, it was because I initially wanted to tell you, but even I don't know why I became like this. Furthermore, with my current state, I don't know how to speak. I can speak now. Zhu Yao touched her own face in hindsight. She could really speak now. Back then, she could only speak like a regular one-year-old child, and was unable to say a complete sentence. But now, she could speak without any obstacles at all. She was growing a little too quickly, wasn't she? Your cultivation has recovered, Yu Yan lightly said. As a foundation paragon, speaking was naturally not a problem. What? Zhu Yao was startled for a moment. She sensed for a moment, and as expected, there was a flow of spiritual energy. Circulating the spiritual energy in a reflexive manner, it condensed into a bolt of lightning. A white bolt of lightning directly struck Yu Yan's head. Ugh, I missed. Nonsense. Yu Yan coldly glanced at her, however. His tone did not sound like he was reprimanding her in the slightest. A bolt of lightning from a mere foundation establishment cultivator obviously couldn't hurt him. In fact, before that bolt of lightning could even touch his body, it had already been dispersed by his pressure. Your disciple is wrong. Although he hadn't been struck, he still had to admit his mistake. This was a matter of attitude. Master, how did my cultivation suddenly recover? I tried it before, but it didn't exist. Yu Yan sat down at the side. Actually, your cultivation has always been there. It's just that in the past, because your body did not have a single strand of spiritual energy, you were unable to use mystic arts. Earlier, that bolt of heavenly lightning you received just happened to contain the lightning spiritual energy you needed. With spiritual energy, naturally, you recovered your cultivation. In that case, she still had to thank that bolt of heavenly lightning that suddenly struck her. Zhu Yao was a little embarrassed. Master, I clearly changed my appearance. Why is my cultivation still here? I don't know either. Yu Yan slowly shook his head. Actually, not only her cultivation, even the strand of divine sense he left behind when he took her in as his disciple, was still on her body. Logically speaking, no matter if it was cultivation or divine sense, once a body died, it would disappear. It was impossible for it to be transferred along with her soul. Even if it was to take over her body, she would still need to cultivate from the beginning. Just who in the world possessed such an ability to be able to allow her to be reborn and still retain her cultivation? And what was this person's intentions? Before we get to the bottom of this matter, stay on Jade Forest Mountain and are not allowed to leave. I'm going to be confined again. Don't, Master. You're going to be confined for 5 years. Your disciple can't take it anymore. What happened to your body is too strange. You're advancing too quickly. In order to prevent unnecessary trouble, you're the safest here. Yu Yan did not have the slightest bit of room for discussion. You must know the tallest tree in the forest, the wind will definitely destroy it. Zhu Yao sank into silence. Her current situation was indeed not suitable for her to appear in front of others. A 1-year-old late-stage foundation, who would believe her? People might even think that she had some sort of heaven-defying mystic treasure. It was best for her to keep a low profile. Yao. Yu Yan reached out his hand and stroked her head, which only had a small tuft of hair. She tried and continuously rotated and dispersed the lump of air to various parts of her body. Hence, a strange scene suddenly appeared in the room. The dumpling-like child on the bed, for a moment, turned into a big-headed infant, then into a big-legged infant, and then into a big-arm infant. Chapter 41. As though Zhu Yao had found a new form of entertainment, she continuously expanded and shrunk every single part of her body. Wait, why did she feel like a balloon? Where are you blowing the drum? Zhu Yao, who finally realized the truth, stopped her hands with tears in her eyes. Sensing the mass of air in her body, she realized that it did not disappear. In any case, it was still showing signs of increasing. Hence, she tried to disperse the mass of air evenly to every corner of her body. This time, it was much more laborious than moving the whole mass of gas. She spent a whole hour to guide all the gas. Her body had already turned into that of a 15 or 16-year-old girl. Growing up overnight, this feeling was a little strange. He took a closer look at his new body. Every part of it was normal. It was concave when it dared to be concave, and protruding where it should be it was flat. This doesn't make sense. Zhu Yao silently inspected the unfermented little soup dumplings in front of her chest, and suddenly had an idea. Since she was able to control the size of her body, then could she readjust some of the areas that were lacking? When she thought of this, Zhu Yao was a little excited, as she immediately controlled the mass of air and ran towards her chest, silently reciting B, C, D, E, F. However, no matter how she guided the air mass, the soup dumplings in front of her chest were still very principled and maintained their original size. She didn't believe it, so she lured all the air masses towards her chest. As a result, she turned back into a dumpling with a puff. This time, even the soup dumplings were gone. Was it really that hard to enlarge her breasts? Zhu Yao had no choice but to give up on this grand scheme. She once again condensed a mass of air and returned to the figure of a young girl. He was really curious about his own appearance, so he used the ice-condensing art and looked at his own face with the reflection of the ice. It turned out that her chubby little bun-like face had already developed in the direction of melon seeds. However, traces of the past could still be seen on her puffy cheeks. Her eyes, however, were somewhat similar to her previous eyes, with double eyelids. Some of them had baby faces. They were cute but not seductive enough. All in all, they weren't ugly. However, she didn't know if it was the aftereffect of having a steamed bun face, but her entire face was tense. She wanted to smile, but found that she could only pull up a strange arc on her face. Not good. Not only was she flat-chested, she also had facial paralysis. Zhu Yao realized that after she had completely adapted to this body, the mass of air in her body had already disappeared, and she could no longer find even a hint of it. She could only tell her master about how she had grown up overnight. However, her master seemed to have already known about it, and was not too surprised by her new appearance. Yu Yan's expression was solemn, as he looked at his disciple, whose height had already reached his chest. Initially, I was worried that due to the heavenly lightning, it would affect your body, but it seems like it's no longer a problem. Ah, what does that mean? Yu Yan, however, turned around and brought her outside. With a wave of his hand, several spiritual swords instantly flew out and landed in different directions. The endless chirping of insects and cries of birds in the surroundings earlier instantly disappeared completely, and an isolation formation had already been formed. Use your strongest move. Zhu Yao was dumbfounded for a moment. Although she did not know what he meant, she still obediently circulated all of the spiritual energy in her body and activated heavenly descent. A bolt of lightning fell from the sky and struck the grass not far away from her. However, it was dispersed by the array the moment it landed. Just as Zhu Yao was about to clarify, just as she took a step forward, she rolled onto the ground with a grunt. Mama's egg! Why did she turn back into a child? Furthermore, she no longer had that mass of air in her body that could change its size. 100 alpacas galloped past her heart. As I thought, Yu Yan calmly carried the little dumpling on the ground and returned to the house. Master? Just what was going on? She could not understand. Do you know why ordinary people can only test their spirit veins after reaching 1 year of age? Yu Yan pulled her little chubby hand, checked her pulse, and inspected her body. Zhu Yao nodded. Isn't spirit veins only formed after 1 year of age? The aptitude of spirit veins is determined from birth. It's not something that is formed after birth. After confirming that she was indeed fine, he retracted his hand. The reason why spirit veins can only be tested after 1 year of age is because the bodies of infants are too weak and are basically unable to bear spiritual energy. If they were to forcefully cultivate, their meridians would break, and they would die. This was also the reason why he only built his foundation when he was 10 years old despite having entered the sect at the age of 3. His body before the age of 10 was basically unable to bear the pressure of building his foundation. But I'm fine. She was a healthy little dumpling. Initially, I was worried about this as well, but today I realized that you can freely change the size of your body. Yu Yan stroked her head, as though he was deep in thought. This body of yours seems to be specially prepared for you to be reborn. Zhu Yao was a little dazed. She suddenly felt as though she had drawn a huge gift pack for leveling up. Then why did I turn back now? Because that move of yours earlier had already exhausted all of your spiritual energy. Once your spiritual energy recovers, you will return to your earlier form. So she was actually Konan Adagawa? Chapter 42. Along the way, she met quite a number of people. They were in groups of 2s and 3s, as though they had just dispersed from some place. Everyone's faces were filled with excitement, as though something exciting had happened, and they were even chatting while walking. That battle earlier was really exciting. That's right. Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao is as expected of the sovereign's personal succeeding disciple. The moment he made his move, the might was already shocking. I think the opponent was too weak, and basically couldn't withstand a single blow from Senior Marshal Uncle. But the opponent's cultivation level was after all a level lower. It's normal for him to lose. But Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao only used one move. One move and he won. And I even heard that Senior Marshal Uncle has already comprehended sword intent. He had just formed his Azoth core. However, I heard that Senior Marshal Uncle was once an outer sect disciple. So what if he was an outer sect disciple? Who knows? Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao might even be able to catch up to that person in Jade Forest Mountain. Haha, that's true. And look, it's Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao, he's here. Zhu Yao had already confirmed that the person they hated was Xiao Yi, and could not help but turn her head to look as well. However, with just a single glance, her heart froze, and she suddenly widened her eyes. Suddenly, it was as though she saw a voice that made her jaw drop. That person was Xiao Yi. The same face, similar figure. And even the mole on the side of his neck was exactly the same. But why the hell was there words on his face? And it was bolded, so eye-catching that it only lacked a frame bug. The hell, it's even in English. And why the hell was there a gigantic yellow exclamation mark floating above his head? And it was even flashing to remind her of its existence. She seemed to be able to hear the do-do-do sound of the alarm. No. The way she opened her eyes must be wrong. She desperately blinked her eyes. Yet, the 3 words on his face still did not seem to disappear. No, it must be a hallucination. Zhu Yao snatched the cloth from the hands of the person next to her and casually wiped it on that face. That's my. The person next to her silently swallowed the last 2 words. I wipe, I wipe, I wipe. But those bolded English words still appeared on the target's face. Can someone give me an explanation? The surroundings instantly turned silent, however. The few female practitioners standing next to Xiao Yi, however, were furiously staring at Zhu Yao, who suddenly appeared. Where did this vixen pop out from? If Zhu Yao were to look carefully, she would realize that among these few female practitioners, there were Ling Long and Suzy, whom she knew. Thank you, little junior martial sister. Xiao Yi finally could not endure the other party's skin-peeling actions and stopped her hand. I'm not tired at all. Even though she didn't know him, he was here to wipe her sweat. After taking a closer look, her eyes lit up. Even though he looked young and had a cold face, he was surprisingly cute. His cheeks, which had some baby fat on them, made one want to take a bite out of them. Xiao Yi's heart instantly rippled, and he could not help but reveal a gentle smile. I wonder how I should address this junior martial sister. Zhu Yao was startled as she stared at his smile, which was a little exaggerated. Even the word bug on his face was a little distorted. She almost could not hold it in, and spat out a mouthful of salted soda on his face. He seemed to hear a voice beside his ear. Player Xiao Yi sent you the skill knowing smile X1. Damage dealt, miss. Zhu Yao instantly ignored it, and instead, slowly raised her head to look at the yellow exclamation mark that was even bigger than his head. Since the words could not be erased, she wondered if she could remove that exclamation mark. For a moment, her hands felt a little itchy. Junior martial sister? Seeing that she did not have any reaction, Xiao Yi waited patiently, and the smile at the corner of his lips grew even more amiable. Don't be afraid. I wonder which mountain you're a disciple from. Only then did Zhu Yao regain her senses. He was sending her a signal? Seeing that more and more female practitioners were releasing killing intent towards her, she knew how amiable Xiao Yi's smile was towards her. However, it was really hard for her to develop a good impression towards a face that had the word bug printed on it. As a qualified technician, when she saw those 3 words, her first reaction was to delete his DL and reprogram it, alright? Little bun? Before she could speak, someone suddenly interrupted her. Unknowingly, Wang Xuji had walked over and was staring at her face in shock. Suddenly recalling something, he pulled her behind him and looked at Xiao Yi at the side cautiously. What are you trying to do now? Xiao Yi frowned, revealing a hint of disgust. Very quickly he retracted it. Junior martial nephew Wang, you've misunderstood. I'm merely greeting this junior martial sister here. Wang Xuji did not speak and simply took a step forward. He used even more effort to block Zhu Yao behind him and coldly looked at him. Xiao Yi was unable to do anything for a moment and could only turn around and leave. The people surrounding them scattered in 2s and 3s as well. Before they left, they did not forget to point their fingers at Wang Xuji, as though they were extremely dissatisfied with his rude actions earlier. Wang Xuji seemed to have already gotten used to it as well, and completely did not mind it. He simply pulled Zhu Yao behind him tightly, and hurriedly walked, leaving the main mountain. Zhu Yao was still immersed in the shock of being recognized in a single glance. When she regained her senses, she realized that she had already arrived at a familiar house. This was Xuji's residence, and she had been here before. How did you come down the mountain? The moment they entered the house, Wang Xuji's expression sank, and he anxiously sized her up. Also, how did you become like this? Zhu Yao was startled. If I say you've mistaken me for someone else. Impossible. His expression instantly turned a little stern, as though he was dissatisfied with her dishonesty. Reaching out his hand, he pinched her cheeks. Little bun, even if you've grown up, you're still a bun. Hurry and tell me what's going on. Bun your sister. Slapping away his evil hands, she saved her own cheeks. She hated this baby face. I've always looked like this. Zhu Yao pondered for a moment, and decided not to tell him the truth for now. Then what did you look like before? When he saw her 2 days ago, she was still an infant, who was not even a year old. How did she turn into a 15 or 16-year-old young lady today? Earlier, I was struck by a very vicious mystic art. She activated her storytelling mode. People who are struck by this mystic art will become younger and younger, until they disappear. Fortunately, I met Master, and he took pity on me, which was why he brought me back. Master said that this was a mystic art that had been lost for a long time, and he had only heard of it a long time ago as well. Only recently did Master think of a way to dispel it. Really? Wang Shuji, however, was still a little doubtful, as he stared at her suspiciously. Chapter 43. You're lying. Wang Shuji slightly narrowed his eyes. According to what you said, then how did you get struck by that strange mystic art? And who was the one who did it? And you're currently a foundation paragon, so it can be seen that you were a practitioner in the past. Then, before you were struck by the mystic art, where did you cultivate? Why did little Wimp suddenly become so sharp? I can't tell you. Why? Because if she was going to put on an act, then she had to go all the way. Half-truths and half-lies were the true essence of lies. Zhu Yao blinked and tried her best to put on a helpless and worried look. I don't want you to get involved in this. If you know too much, I'm afraid you'll bring trouble upon yourself. As expected, Wang Shuji was startled, and his eyes instantly softened quite a bit. As though he suddenly recalled something, he reached out his hand and stroked her head. As expected, the two of you are very similar. Similar? Similar to who? That senior martial sister you mentioned before? Zhu Yao continued to act dumb. However, Wang Shuji lightly sighed, as though he was unwilling to talk about this topic anymore. Alright, even if the mystic art on your body has been dispelled, you shouldn't randomly run around. Especially that Xiao Yi. Don't easily get involved with him, understand? Why? There's no why. Wang Shuji did not explain. Instead, he pulled her hand and walked out. I'll send you back to Jade Forest Mountain. Remember, don't easily leave the mountain in the future. Zhu Yao could not help but roll her eyes at him. Didn't this old lady run out because of you, stinky brat? However, seeing that he was fine, she was relieved. However, even if he was fine this time, it did not mean that he would be this lucky in the future. After returning to Jade Forest Mountain, she could not help but pull Wang Shuji, who was about to turn and leave. Earlier, were you sparring with Xiao Yi at the martial arts field? Wang Shuji was silent for a moment, and then nodded. Zhu Yao could not help but sigh. Do you think your cultivation can defeat him? Wang Shuji clenched his fists, and bitterly gritted his teeth. No. So, when you sparred with him, was it purely because you were courting death? This brat was so serious even when courting death. What do you know? His expression instantly darkened, filled with embarrassment from having his thoughts exposed. His emotions suddenly became agitated. Do you know the feeling of personally witnessing the most important person to you die in front of you? Back then, if Xiaoyi did not hesitate, then what about you? Zhu Yao reminded herself not to be soft-hearted, and had to say something even colder. From the first time she saw Wang Shuji after she came back, she knew that her death was the biggest knot in his heart. That was why he had been stuck at the foundation building Great Circle, unable to make any progress. If he continued to brood over this, then this knot in his heart would definitely evolve into a demon in his heart, and eventually destroy his path to immortality. And the best way to untie the knot in one's heart was to break it. You said that because of Xiao Yi's hesitation, it led to the death of the most important person to you. Since she's the most important person to you, why do you need to rely on others to save her? What are you doing? I was maintaining the sword formation at that time. His aura was a little chaotic, and his expression was blank. So you don't have the strength to save her? You can't even save him yourself, so why push it to others? Or do you not want to save her at all? No, I want to save her. But you don't have the ability? You can't even save people. Shuji, in the end, do you hate Xiao Yi for not acting in time? Or do you hate yourself for not being able to save her? Wang Shuji was stunned on the spot. As though he had suddenly understood something. His face was clearly filled with despair. However, she had no choice but to cut the Gordian knot. The one you hate has always been yourself, right? Wang Xuji's entire being became dispirited. The corner of his lips gently twitched, revealing an expression that was hard to tell if he was crying or laughing. What else can I do? Other than regret, what else can I do? Do you plan to regret like this for the rest of your life? I don't care if you're willing to fall into depravity. However, how would she feel about the person who died for you? Do you think she would be willing to see you continue on like this? Wang Xuji fiercely raised his head. Zhu Yao patted on his shoulders. Although you feel that it's because your cultivation is insufficient that you can't save her, then you should cultivate to the level where you can save people, bastard. Wang Xuji did not reply. His eyes were still filled with an inextinguishable sense of confusion. However, he finally began to reflect on himself and dragged his heavy steps back. Zhu Yao sighed deeply. She had already said what she needed to say. She had to give him some time to think things through on his own. At the very least, during this period of time when he thought things through, she did not have to worry that he would run to Xiao Yi and court death. The strange things happening to Xiao Yi were getting more and more frequent. She did not know why it was like this either. That strange bug on his face, and the clear exclamation mark on top of his head. No one else could see it. Were they hinting something to her? She felt more and more that her transmigration and subsequent rebirth were not as simple as they looked on the surface. Furthermore, they were closely related to Xiao Yi. Zhu Yao had a dream, yet it did not feel like her own dream. Because in the dream, she witnessed another person's life, and this person was even the person who gave her a huge headache, Xiao Yi. Xiao Yi was an orphan since he was young. He did not have a heaven-shaking complicated background, and was simply a child who was casually abandoned by his family due to a famine. He was like all the other little beggars. In order to survive, he would resort to any means necessary. He did all sorts of sneaky things, and had also suffered the cold eyes and disdain of others. For the sake of a single mouthful of rice, he would even snatch food from wild dogs. Until the year he was 10, when he was brought to Ancient Hill's sect by a disciple who had received him. He was taken in as a disciple by the sect master, and in the beginning, he was highly regarded. However, because he offended little Fatty Zhao, an inner sect disciple, his cultivation was completely crippled, and he was expelled from the inner sect. However, this instead made him stronger. In the outer sect, he was punished to guard the North Plain Pavilion. The North Plain Pavilion was filled with the waste materials used to refine weapons in the sect over the years. By coincidence, he obtained a strange piece of waste material. Because he felt that it was fun, he brought it along with him. However, because of an accidental injury, his blood dripped onto that piece of waste material, and he realized that it was actually a metal spirit. At the beginning of the creation of the world, the metal spirit was formed from the purest metal spiritual energy in the world. The metal spirit had just gained sentience. Yet, because it came into contact with his blood, it immediately recognized him as its master. And he just so happened to possess the metal spirit vein as well. The metal spirit, that was formed from spiritual energy, possessed the power to control all of the metal spiritual energy in the world. Hence, possessing the metal spirit was equivalent to possessing the entire world's metal spiritual energy. And the metal spirit vein was the toughest spirit vein out of the 5 elemental spirit veins. It had an extremely important effect when it came to handling weapons and wielding swords. Chapter 44. With the guidance of a master, Xiao Yi's cultivation was as though a cheat had been activated, as it slowly grew. Though there were people who did not know what was good for them, and came to find trouble with him, they were all suppressed by his strength, and he had even unintentionally obtained the hearts of quite a few girls. Towards the later stages, he even overcame all sorts of obstacles, be it fighting heretic practitioners, killing demons, or entering secret realms. Every single time, he seemed to be on the brink of death, but every single time, he was able to escape from danger. It was not because he suddenly activated some special ability, and then roared out, representing the moon to destroy the villain. It was because someone had fallen in love with him, and had lent him a helping hand in time. And because of these experiences, he had obtained even more opportunities. In the end, he had even unexpectedly gathered all 5 types of sentient spirits. metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. And then he summoned a divine dragon. Oh wait, it was a successful ascension. He even defeated those geniuses with mutated spirit veins, including the lightning spirit veins, and became the first person in the cultivation world to ascend within 2,000 years. The people who cultivated after that could only look up to his buttocks. When Zhu Yao saw the later stages, she could not help but ridicule this dream of hers. In the dream, the Xiao Yi in the beginning was rather inspirational, raising his cultivation and walking towards the peak. However, the later stages had completely changed, from diligently cultivating to diligently chasing after girls. As long as there were girls who were related to him, in the end, they would fall under his long robe. Xiao Yi had even begun to enter his mode. Whether it was the princess of the demon realm, the queen of the human realm, junior martial sisters of the same sect, or the wildflowers by the roadside, as long as the girls saw him, as though they had contracted some kind of illness of having not seen a man for tens of thousands of years, they would follow him to their deaths, and they could even coexist harmoniously with each other. Every single one of them would feel uncomfortable if they did not love him, and his definition of love was, if they loved him, they would NPC for him. The hell, this was simply a miracle. Among them, included that demigod sovereign master of his. Even Zhu Yao felt like feeding them some brain-dead pills from watching them. In the end, Xiao Yi naturally built a huge, and when this Xiao Yi was at the late stages of demigod, he intentionally stayed in the cultivation world for an extra 1,000 years, just to wait for the dozen or so most pampered girls in his to ascend together. As for what happened after the ascension, Zhu Yao could not see it. She thought that the dream would end here, but in a blink of an eye, her vision returned to the cultivation world. After the legendary Xiao Yi ascended, the cultivation world did not welcome peace. Because of his ascension, the 5 spirits cheat-like divine artifacts followed him and ascended to the higher realm. The cultivation world lost the guidance of the 5 spirits, and the spiritual energy in the world continuously flowed away, unable to gather. Without the guidance of the wood spirit, the spirit plants could not absorb the wood spirit qi, and began to wither. In less than 100 years, even the most common materials for the heart-nourishing pill could not be found in the cultivation world. Cultivators, on the other hand, could no longer absorb spiritual energy into their bodies. Not to mention ascending, their cultivation could no longer advance. The most pitiful was the mortal world. Due to the loss of the 5 spirits, water could no longer nourish everything. Even the mortal plants were affected and withered. Fire could not expel evil. Mortals were infected with strange diseases and died in large numbers. There was no vitality in the soil, and crops could no longer grow on the land. Food was not a problem for cultivators, but it was fatal for mortals. As a result, there was famine everywhere, and corpses were everywhere. After a few thousand years, there were no longer any living beings in the lower realms. The end of the world had arrived. Zhu Yao looked at the figures that fell one after another, and the desolation that was completely devoid of anything in the world. A strong sense of sorrow instantly pressed down on her, making it hard for her to breathe. Those were emotions that did not belong to her. Yet, they were heavy to the point of suffocation, as though they were the final shouts of this world before it collapsed. She felt more and more uncomfortable. Suddenly, the scene in front of her flashed, and the feeling disappeared in an instant. She found herself sitting at home, not the natural grass hut on Jade Forest Mountain, but the 70-something square meter small house that she struggled for a few years to buy. She had returned to the modern world. Zhu Yao blankly looked at the familiar scene in front of her. This was her house, this was her room, and in front of her was her own computer. Even the cup next to the computer, that had a Hello Kitty printed on it, was exactly the same. She couldn't react for a moment. The QQ on the computer screen suddenly flashed. It was a message from his colleague Xiaofang. Xiaofang. Boss, the bug you mentioned back then has already been dealt with. You're really godly. How did you find out? No matter if it was during the closed beta or closed beta, no one discovered it at all. Zhu Yao was startled and suddenly recalled. Wasn't this what her colleague said before she transmigrated? Back then, She just happened to be discussing with Xiao Fang about the loophole in the company's newly developed MMORPG. That was a rather fatal technical loophole. It was very possible that because of the imbalance in the design, it would cause the entire game system to lose balance. If such a game were to really be released, it would bring about huge losses to the company, and the game would naturally be banned as well. However, this problem was not discovered by her, but by an old friend of hers, a gamer. She moved her mouse, and found that gamer's QQ, Realm Spirit. Zhu Yao was stunned for a moment, and realized that her hands were no longer under her control, as they began to type on the other party's keyboard. And the words he said were the exact same as before she transmigrated. Technology Department Zhu Yao. Thank you. We have already fixed the loophole you mentioned. You've helped me once again. Realm Spirit, you're welcome. I merely pointed out where the problem was. The one who actually thought of a solution and fixed it was you. Technology Department Zhu Yao. Haha, I still have to thank you. After all, I spent a lot of effort on this game. This game world was created by me alone. If it were to collapse because of this, I would be very disappointed as well. Realm Spirit, do you care about this world a lot? Technology Department Zhu Yao. Of course, it's my hard work, right? Realm Spirit, I have a world as well, and there's a little problem with it. Technology Department Zhu Yao. Oh, what game is it? Can I help you? Realm Spirit, you're willing to help me? Technology Department Zhu Yao. Of course, courtesy demands reciprocity. In any case, I'm in the field of technology. Fixing 1 or 2 bugs isn't a problem at all. Realm Spirit, alright. Technology Department Zhu Yao. Alright, just what kind of game is it? What problem did it have? Realm Spirit. My question is, before Zhu Yao could clearly see what his question was, a ray of intense white light pierced over, and Zhu Yao was startled awake. She looked at her surroundings a little blankly. This place was Jade Forest Mountain. She was still in this cultivation world. Chapter 45. Over time, the two of them became friends. When she joined the gaming company and was in charge of the technical work for large-scale online games, he also followed her into the game she was in charge of. He was always able to tell her where the loopholes in the game were at first notice. She, on the other hand, was in charge of editing. She had always thought that the other party was a game designer god or a professional gamer, which was why he was so proficient. However, the two of them had always contacted each other online and had never met face to face. Now that he thought about it, there were many suspicious points. For example, she had once tried to invite him into the company to work with her on technical work, but he had rejected her with the reason that he couldn't. It wasn't that he didn't want to or wasn't willing to, but that he couldn't. As for the timing of her transmigration, it seemed like the moment she agreed to help him deal with the bug, she had already arrived at the small mountain village. She couldn't help but suspect if he was pulled over by some powerful being in this world to fix the loopholes in this world. And what happened to Xiao Yi was clearly telling her that he was that bug. Thinking about it carefully, although that dream was ridiculous, the plot at the beginning was indeed exactly the same as what happened to Xiao Yi. If her guess was correct, his current cultivation level wasn't just at the core formation realm, but the late stage of the core formation realm. He was about to reach the peak stage. She was just a foundation-building cultivator. How could she fight against him? Zhu Yao felt terrible all over. Was there anything more depressing than realizing that she had crossed over and become a villain? Wait a minute. In her dreams, she didn't seem to dream about herself at all. It was as if he had never existed. Not even his master and Wang Shuji. However, they clearly existed, and they had even come into contact with Xiao Yi. Then could she think that her appearance was actually an accident? After thinking about it carefully, if she wasn't here, Dr. Wang wouldn't have sent Wang Shuji to participate in the deity's disciple selection, and naturally, he wouldn't be able to make it to Ancient Hill Sect. And because Master really couldn't accept a disciple with a lightning spiritual root, he could only choose to ascend. Naturally, it was impossible for him to appear in the cultivation world. She had to flap her butterfly wings to make these changes. When she thought about it this way, she was still rather awesome my ass. Didn't Xiao Yi still obtain the metal spirit? Zhu Yao instantly felt a headache. If Xiao Yi was a bug, Then what was she? GM? Crash. She was just a game technician. She could fix the bugs in the game, but she couldn't fix the bugs in this world. Moreover, even if he was a GM, he would at least have some gaming privileges, such as invincibility. He suddenly thought of her strange resurrection, and the notification of returning to the respawn point after death. Could it be that she could resurrect infinitely? But what was the use of this privilege? If he couldn't win, was he going to die in front of his opponent? Damn, I don't want this invincible mode at all. Crash. Zhu Yao, who knew the truth, was depressed for an entire 3 days, silently lighting a candle for her fate of going against the person who had activated the protagonist's halo. After 3 days, she pulled herself together. She had always been an optimistic girl, and believed that there were no obstacles in life that she could not overcome. As the saying goes, as long as the hoe was wielded well, there was no wall that could not be dug out. So what if she was the main character? At the very least, she was a GM who had activated her invincible mode. In summary, Xiao Yi's greatest cheat was the 5 types of spirits, and the disappearance of these 5 types of spirits caused the collapse of the world. Currently, Xiao Yi already had a metal spirit in his hands. Then the remaining 4 must definitely not be obtained by him. Master, 10 years later, will it be the time when the Taesioluk secret realm opens? Yuling looked at her a little strangely. The Taesioluk secret realm opens once every 500 years. It is indeed time. This disciple of his had always been unconcerned about other matters. So how did she know? Of course she would know, because Xiao Yi had obtained the wood spirit in this secret realm. She did not know if it was related to his spirit veins, but the first things Xiao Yi found were the metal spirit and wood spirit, which were equivalent to his own spirit veins. And it was because of this that he successfully formed his nascent soul. Master, I wish to go to that secret realm as well. Yuling frowned. Taesioluk was a mustard seed dimensional space left behind by a supreme ancient being, and it would open once every 500 years. Although there were countless spiritual herbs, spiritual medicines, and various rare treasures inside, it was filled with dangers as well, and there were even 10th-ranked spiritual beasts. No, that place is too dangerous, and you have yet to form your Azoth core. That secret realm could only be entered by those with the cultivation of an Azoth stage. Those below or above the Azoth stage would be automatically ejected by the formation at the entrance. I will form my Azoth core in these 10 years. Zhu Yao was still confident in her own comprehension ability. Yu Yin frowned even deeper. Even if you form your Azoth core, you will only have the cultivation of an early-stage Azoth stage. Although there are many opportunities in Taesioluk, you have to wait until you have the ability to protect yourself first. He had once entered that secret realm as well. Back then, he had the cultivation of an Azoth stage paragon. Even with that kind of cultivation, it was extremely strenuous for him to enter. Even if it was just the outer circle, there were still many 6th and 7th ranked spiritual beasts gathered there. The further one walked towards the center, the more dangerous it would be. No one had ever reached the center before. At the very least, she had to wait until she reached the Azoth stage paragon before she could give it a try. When it opens the next time, Master will not stop you. Master, I must go. Next time there would be no next time, because she clearly knew that after Xiao Yi brought the wood spirit out, the entire secret realm would collapse, and from then on, there would no longer be Taesioluk. I have my own reasons, it's just that right now, it's not convenient for me to tell others. Master, please grant me my wish. Yuling turned silent. His stupid disciple rarely begged him for something so seriously. He recalled that the last time she begged him was to give that stinky brat from Zemo's family a defensive mystic artifact. He did not allow it, and in the end she never returned. He suddenly felt a little worried. If he did not allow it this time, she would not be able to return again. Zhu Yao quietly waited, however, in her heart. She decided that no matter if he allowed it or not, she still had to go. At most she would just sneak out. A moment later, Yu Yin stood up and took out something from his storage ring. A moment later, she saw him grabbing onto a purple lightning bolt that was still flashing and crackling. Just how did he keep something like this? Zhu Yao was dumbfounded. Master, what are you doing? Even if he was angry, there was no need to strike her with lightning, right? Follow me. Yu Yan gestured for her to follow, turned around, and headed towards the direction of the cold lake at the mountain peak. Standing at the side of the cold lake, Yu Yan cast a water-repelling mystic art with a wave of his hand. The lake that was still emitting out a dense cold air, suddenly, as though it was severed by something, the lake water split into two halves, and the bottom of the lake, which had lost the lake water, was still a black expanse, and the bottom could not be seen. Yu Yan, however, did not stop, as he headed towards the severed passageway, and immediately walked down. Chapter 46. The deeper they went, the darker it became, as though there was no light at all. When there was no longer any light in the surroundings, only the purple lightning bolt in Yu Yan's hand was still flashing. Zhu Yao could not help but grab onto the corner of the person in front of her, afraid that she would step on empty air and fall flat on her face. Yu Yan, who was grabbed, was startled for a moment. Recalling that the person behind him was his stupid disciple, he did not stop her, and continued to bring her forward. After walking for an unknown period of time, Zhu Yao felt a flash of white light in front of her eyes. As though a black curtain had suddenly been pulled open, the surroundings lit up. This was a spacious stone room. There were no decorations in the surroundings, and there was only a praying mat at the center. It looked like a regular cultivation cave dwelling, though the surroundings were filled with lightning spiritual energy, causing her to feel especially comfortable. Yu Yan walked to the center of the stone room, and with a wave of his hand, he threw the purple lightning bolt into the air. Only then did Zhu Yao realize that there was actually a large amount of water floating above her. The entire lake could be seen clearly from here, and she could even faintly see the scenery of the shore. They were at the bottom of the lake. This structure defied gravity, causing her to be extremely shocked. Master, why isn't the water falling down? Like a country bumpkin, she pointed above her head. Very evidently, she received an eye roll from her master. Formation. As expected, she was a stupid disciple. This is where master usually cultivates. In the next few years, you can form your Azoth core here. So master usually cultivated here. It was no wonder he often went missing. Yu Yan looked at the purple lightning bolt above her head, which he had already fixed in the air. This is the 9 heavenly lightning. You can guide the lightning spiritual energy you need from it. 9 heavenly lightning. Wasn't that the Ascension Tribulation lightning? Master could even catch lightning bolts? Zhu Yao sensed for a moment, and indeed, the lightning spiritual energy in the surroundings had grown denser. She obediently sat at the center of the formation, and began to meditate with her legs crossed. Following the method of guiding spiritual energy into her body earlier, she slowly absorbed the lightning spiritual energy into her body. Due to her previous experience, she completely did not feel the pain she felt when her spiritual energy went berserk back then, and simply felt her entire body was comfortable. Yuling observed for a moment at the side. After realizing that her disciple did not have any abnormalities, she finally relaxed. After pondering for a moment, she took out a few more lightning bolts which looked exactly the same, and fixed them in the air before leaving with a peace of mind. The 9 heavenly lightning was indeed a lightning tribulation for ascension, so it contained the highest amount of lightning spiritual energy. Normally it was not easy to see them. These were the few that he caught by chance in the abyss. As long as his disciple drew spiritual energy into his body, it would cause the spiritual energy to go berserk. Now that he had this lightning, he didn't need to draw any other lightning spiritual energy. It was just right for his disciple to use it to help his disciple cultivate. Zhu Yao meditated for 2 years. When she woke up, a layer of dust had already accumulated on her body. A small sandstorm could be triggered at any time, and she couldn't help coughing. He stretched out his hand to form a seal, wanting to cast a dirt removal spell. He looked up at the clear water above his head, and decided to go out and wash up. Although the dirt removal technique was convenient, people who were used to bathing in water always felt that it was not clean. This was probably another sense of psychological cleanliness. As soon as she walked out of the pool, she found a lotus leaf beside the pool. A set of clothes was neatly placed on the leaf. Looking at the style and size, it should be hers. She immediately understood who had placed it there. Her master was indeed her sweet little cotton-padded jacket. She gave him 32 likes for all his life skills. She picked up the clothes, only to realize that other than the clothes, there was also a bottle of pellets. Her master had never approved of her eating pellets to raise her cultivation. So why would he place the pellets here? She poured them out curiously, and realized they were actually candies. The hell? Her body would only turn into a child's. She wasn't a real child, alright? What's the meaning of placing candies here? Zhu Yao poured out a handful, and stuffed it into her mouth to vent her anger. Crunching sounds could be heard as she chewed on it. The taste wasn't bad. Patting away the crumbs on her hands, she stripped naked and dove into the pool. This was a cold pool. The water was originally extremely cold, but to practitioners, it was just right. Zhu Yao washed off the ashes on her body, and could not help but size up this cold pool. Actually, this cold pool was rather big. Compared to the swimming pools in the modern era, it was countless times bigger. The pool was very deep as well, and the bottom could not be seen at all from above. However, the miraculous thing was, she could clearly see it from the stone room below. Fortunately, there was currently no one below. Wait a minute. She seemed to have frequently come here to bathe in the past, and she had always stripped naked. And the stone room below was where her master usually cultivated. Then wasn't she, the hell? Suddenly, her entire being felt uncomfortable. Master, let's talk about life. However, recalling how she had been bathed by him countless times when she was still a child, and she had always been stripped naked, she suddenly did not feel that uncomfortable anymore. As expected, she no longer had any morals to speak of anymore. Her morals kept dropping, and she had gotten used to it. Zhu Yao bathed for almost an hour, before climbing out of the water. She changed into the clothes on the shore, stuffed a handful of candies into her mouth, and was just about to return to continue cultivating, when she suddenly sensed a spiritual energy disturbance at the Sword Mountain. And that spiritual energy was very familiar. It was Wang Shuji's. Zhu Yao paid attention, only to realize that dark clouds had suddenly gathered in the sky above the Sword Mountain. A moment later, the sky there had already darkened. Those were tribulation clouds. Little Wimp was about to form his Azoth core. She was a little shocked, and then she felt relieved. So many years had passed, and with his aptitude, he should have formed his Azoth core long ago. However, because of her death, the knot in his heart had yet to be resolved, hence, his cultivation had always been stagnant. Now it seemed like the words she said before were still useful. He had thought it through. The tribulation lightning for Wang Shuji's Azoth core formation was not as exaggerated as Xiao Yi's. The tribulation clouds did not cover the entire sky either, nor did they darken the sky and earth, nor did they fly sand and stones. They simply covered a small part of the sky above the Sword Mountain in an orderly manner, and there were exactly 81 heavenly lightning bolts striking, no more no less, and there were no naughty tribulation lightning bolts running towards her. Of course, there were no special phenomena in the sky either. After the tribulation clouds were done striking, they quickly packed up and dispersed cleanly. Zhu Yao waited for a moment, and when she once again sensed Wang Shuji's spiritual energy, she was finally at ease. It seemed like he had formed his Azoth core, and successfully leveled up. After all, he was still a child whom she had watched grow up. Zhu Yao was a little pleased in her heart, but when she thought about it, she was still at the foundation stage, and did not even have the slightest hint of forming her Azoth core. In an instant she felt unwell. This was just like when she was young, when her teacher assigned a study group, one with good grades, and one with bad grades. She was initially the child with good grades, and wholeheartedly helped the child with bad grades to tutor them. In the end, when the results were handed out, the other party's grades were actually higher than hers. Chapter 47. Returning to the stone room, Zhu Yao put in even more effort in her cultivation, as she constantly absorbed the spiritual energy from the purple lightning bolts. The purple lightning bolts slowly began to disappear as well, and when the 2 lightning bolts were completely consumed, Zhu Yao finally felt that familiar pain. However, forming one's Azoth core was different from building one's foundation. Building one's Azoth core only required one to break through the restriction on one's meridians and expand the amount of spiritual energy one could absorb. However, forming one's Azoth core required one to compress and store spiritual energy. This process required extreme care, as a slight mistake could possibly cause one's dantian to shatter, and the formation of the Azoth core would fail. Zhu Yao inspected herself for a moment and realized that the lightning spiritual energy in her body was already filled to the brim, and it was beginning to surge in all directions. If this continued, her meridians would definitely be torn apart. She could only endure the immense pain and follow the method her master taught her, slowly guiding the spiritual energy into her dantian, and then compressing the lightning energy. It sounded simple, but in reality, it was extremely difficult. She wasn't a compressor, and spiritual energy did not have a physical body in the first place. So how could it shrink just like that? No matter how she guided it with her mental energy, the spiritual energy would always swell up when it was compressed on one side, and it was very hard to control, unless there was some sort of energy that could make it circulate everywhere and converge into a single point. Zhu Yao pondered for a moment, and unknowingly, she thought of centrifugal force. If objects were to continuously circulate in the same direction, they would converge into a single point. Just like stirring water in the same direction, it would form a whirlpool with a single point as the main point. If she were to compress the spiritual energy around the point of the whirlpool, she would be able to roll it into a ball like a ball of fur. When she thought of this method, she immediately circulated the spiritual energy in her dantian, and towards a single direction, she began to circulate it at an extreme speed. As expected, at the center of the circulation, the pressure slowly compressed into a single point. That point was extremely small, but as more and more spiritual energy was drawn in, the point slowly began to expand as well, from a point to the size of a bean. However, the spiritual energy in her body had already been completely consumed. She had no choice but to continue to crazily absorb spiritual energy. A large amount of spiritual energy entered her body and was instantly absorbed by the whirlpool in her dantian. The bean grew larger as well, and the remaining 5 purple lightning bolts in the stone room were rapidly disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye as well. When Yu Yan entered, he just happened to see the last bolt of lightning disappearing. Hurriedly he pulled out another 3 and threw them up. Only then did he manage to prevent the spiritual energy from going berserk. Turning back to look at his disciple in the middle, she seemed to be surrounded by a large amount of lightning spiritual energy. Furthermore, the lightning spiritual energy seemed to have received some kind of command, revolving around her in a certain direction. Although he knew that his disciple's affinity with lightning spiritual energy was extremely high, this was the first time he had seen such obedient lightning spiritual energy. It was as if everything was working according to her will. After an unknown period of time, Zhu Yao felt that the pea in her body slowly turned into the size of a marble, and it could no longer move anymore. Only then did she stop. Dan succeeded. Only then did Zhu Yao heave a sigh of relief. Opening her eyes, she just happened to see Yu Yan, who was sitting in front of her with a stern expression. "Master, will you come and protect me?" Yu Yan responded. Reaching out a finger, he tapped on her forehead. "Relax. Let me take a look at your dantian." A gust of refreshing energy charged straight into her dantian. Zhu Yao instinctively wanted to stop it, but when she heard his words she relaxed. Yu Yan inspected her dantian, and as expected he saw a round and smooth silver Azoth core floating on top of it. It was filled with spiritual energy, and there were strands of lightning surrounding it. Looking at the Azoth core carefully, there were even streaks of purple patterns. Yu Yan was even more astonished. Usually, Azoth cores were rarely this round and smooth, and did not have any sharp edges at all. It had to be known that compressing spiritual energy was a very taxing and time-consuming task. It was impossible to do it flawlessly. Hence, every person's Azoth core had a different shape, but in general, they all had sharp edges. His disciples completely did not have any. Yu Yan retracted his hand and looked at Zhu Yao for a moment. He was getting more and more unable to understand this disciple of his. Master, master, how is it? How is it? Although she had formed her Azoth core, she still did not have any concept of it. Yu Yan was silent for a moment before nodding. Not bad. Your Azoth core is much more condensed than a normal person's. Hearing his praise, Zhu Yao completely entered into a smug mode. Ha 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 ha, I knew it. Master, look, I have already formed my Azoth core. Are there any rewards? Zhu Yao reached out her hand and put on an expression that looked as though she was begging for praise and rewards. Yu Yan was startled for a moment. Looking at her eyes that were about to emit out stars, he nodded. Forming a Azoth core was indeed a reward. He then took out a bottle and placed it in her palm. Zhu Yao's eyes instantly shone a few degrees brighter. She immediately opened the bottle cap and looked inside. Her excited expression earlier instantly darkened completely. The hell, why is it candy? Raising her head, she looked at a certain master who had a calm expression. What should she do if she wanted to deceive her master and destroy her ancestors? Master. Zhu Yao planned to discuss with her master about the education methods. But the moment she stood up, she suddenly stepped on something and fell onto the ground with a plop. Strangely, she glanced at her sleeves and trousers that suddenly grew longer and realized something. The hell? Why did she turn back into a child? Because forming her Azoth core used up all of the spiritual energy in Zhu Yao's body. She once again returned to her original appearance, the appearance of a 7-year-old child. That's right, she spent 7 years before finally forming her Azoth core. Her master said that she had just formed her Azoth core. And once her realm stabilized, this situation of turning into a child would no longer occur. After forming her Azoth core, there would be a great lightning tribulation. As long as she left this place, the heavens and earth would sense it, and then, the lightning tribulation would descend. However, in her current situation, it was extremely dangerous to leave this place. Hence, the best solution was to first fully charge the stone room. No, wait, it was to recover her spiritual energy before leaving. There was an isolation formation here, so she would not be discovered by the lightning tribulation for now. Hence, she had no choice but to continue meditating and absorb spiritual energy. Raising her head, she glanced at the last bolt of purple lightning above her head, which had already lost a huge amount of weight. Zhu Yao jokingly said, "Don't be anxious, I'm going to eat you later." When her words fell, the lightning, which was still quietly emitting light by itself earlier, suddenly began to twist in a flirtatious manner, emitting out even louder crackling sounds. It had an excited look, as though it had taken drugs. Zhu Yao was speechless. Why didn't she know that these lightning bolts had a masochistic attribute? They were still so excited when they heard that they were going to be eaten. The more the lightning twisted, the happier it became. Zhu Yao decided to speed up and eat it as soon as possible. After spending another half a day, Zhu Yao's spiritual energy finally recovered, and her body was filled with energy as well. No, she had returned to the appearance of a young girl. However, she was still unable to completely absorb that bolt of lightning. Let's go. Zhu Yao waved her hands and left the stone room. That bolt of lightning had also turned into a series of twists and turns, shaking towards her, as though it was waving at her. Chapter 48. When she came out, Yu Yan was already waiting for her. He set up a few formations on the empty space beside the pool to help resist the lightning tribulation. Following Yu Yan's instructions, Zhu Yao sat on the formation core. Everything was prepared, and all that was left was to wait for the heavenly lightning to descend. Zhu Yao took a deep breath, looked at the bright sky, and then, the sun set. Damn, where's the promised lightning tribulation? Zhu Yao, who had waited for an entire day, turned her head around with a pleading look. Master, why wasn't there any tribulation lightning? She had clearly formed her Azoth core. He didn't strike when he should, but when he didn't dare to strike, he wantonly struck. There was definitely something wrong with this world. Yu Yan did not know what was going on either. Logically speaking, his disciple was indeed an Azoth stage practitioner, and looking at the shape of her Azoth core, the might of this lightning tribulation should not be weak. Hence he made such preparations. But for an entire day, there was still no movement from the sky. Let's go back first. There was no other way. There were too many strange things happening to his disciple. He was already used to it. Zhu Yao nodded and crawled up. Though not being struck by lightning was a good thing for practitioners, because there was one less tribulation, why did she feel a strange feeling of being tricked by someone? Wait! Yu Yan suddenly reached out his hand and stopped her. With a stern expression, he raised his head and looked towards the sky. There's the presence of tribulation clouds. Zhu Yao immediately raised her head and looked towards the sky anxiously as well. It was already evening, and the sky was already half dark, yet there was still a little bit of light. After staring for a while, a dark cloud suddenly floated over. But why are my balls so small? Zhu Yao looked dumbfoundedly at the basin-sized tribulation cloud. It looked as though it was rushing over, as it floated in a very comical manner. As it floated, it was even leaking air. Most importantly, the cloud had a poor sense of direction. It accidentally floated past her head, paused for a moment, and then floated back above her head. The tribulation cloud finally stopped above her head, and then it seemed to be brewing something. After a while, she heard a crackling sound, and a lightning bolt as thin as a thread emerged from the cloud layer, rushing towards her. Then it stopped. It stopped 2 steps away from her. Twisting its body in confusion, it leaned towards her face. Smack! Zhu Yao, Yu Yan, Pashi, Baji your sister Bag. Don't tell me you're a tribulation lightning. Unfortunately, the lightning had already disappeared. And then, the tribulation cloud floated away. The cloud floated away, floated away, floated away. Damn it! What was going on? Are you guys sent by God to act cute? Both master and disciple were stunned for a full quarter of an hour. Yu Wang. I'm fine. Oh. A moment later, Yu Yan silently kept away the formation on the ground, stroking his disciple's head which had already been completely dumbfounded. He suddenly understood a little why his disciple was so stupid. So it was caused by the environment. Go back and rest first. I'll teach you spells tomorrow. Oh. A while later. Desire your sister. Zhu Yao was dealt a deep blow. Thinking about Xiao Yi who had activated his protagonist's halo. When he went through the lightning tribulation, the entire ancient hill sect was enveloped by tribulation clouds. That grandeur, that extravagance, and especially that gigantic dragon, which was imposing in the first half, and convulsing in the second half. Just by recalling it, she could feel his domineering aura leaking out. Even without mentioning the protagonist's halo, even that little wimp Wang Shuji's lightning tribulation, at the very least, had enveloped the entire Sword Mountain. Bolts of solid tribulation lightning resounded through the clouds. Why did it turn into a wash basin when it came to her? The wash basin tribulation was very sad. However, she still had to live her life as usual. Her master had already agreed for her to go to the Taesiolux secret realm. Although she did not know the reason for his compromise, to her, it was a good thing. She had to find the wood spirit before Xiao Yi. Xiao Yi possessed the metal and wood dual spirit veins. His cultivation, who had already obtained the metal spirit, had already risen so quickly, let alone the wood spirit. She believed that by then, the humans would no longer be able to stop him from leveling up. Hence, she definitely could not let him obtain the wood spirit. However, with her cultivation, it was not suitable for her to have a direct confrontation with him. Hence, Zhu Yao began to cultivate diligently like never before. She seemed to have brought out the momentum she had when she was taking her college entrance exams in the past, and cultivated day and night without stopping. Furthermore, she realized that many of the mystic arts in this world were interlinked with the game. As a game technician, it was easier for her to accept these things. However, even so, in order to integrate all of these, she had spent exactly 3 years. Bang! This was the 3,569th time that Zhu Yao was beaten down by a certain master in a single move. Spitting out a few strands of wild grass that had entered her body, Zhu Yao stood up. Swinging the long sword in her hand, she said, "Again!" She had always believed that the best way to raise her techniques was through actual combat. Hence, in these 3 years, what she did the most was to look for a beating. No, she was looking for her master to spar with her. However, the difference between her and Yu Yan's level was not just a tiny bit. Even if they were to compete in pure sword techniques, she basically had a fate of being stuck to the edge. Often after 3 years of hard work, she was still unable to withstand a single blow from her master. This feeling of bang, 3,570 times. Again. Zhu Yao continued to pounce forward. This time, however, Yu Yan did not respond. With a wave of his hand, his disciple's long sword had already automatically flown into his hands. There's no need to train anymore today. In the past, didn't I always train until the sky turned dark? Zhu Yao was a little startled. Master treats me too well. I simply can't believe it. Yu Yan approached her, reached out his hand, and stroked her head. His brows, however, furrowed. You still insist on going to Taisialuk? Zhu Yao nodded. I must go. She did not dare to casually say that she was going to save the world. However, since she had already arrived in this world, she would try her best to do what she could. Yu Yan lightly sighed, and grew even more worried. Why wasn't this disciple of his a little more stupid? Tomorrow is the day the secret realm opens. You must make preparations early. Thank you, Master. So this was the reason why she did not continue training. Follow me. Yu Yan turned and walked towards the straw cottage. Zhu Yao eagerly followed behind, only to see him placing her sword on the table, and then removing the sword tassel on his own sword. After pondering for a moment, he took out a white jade-like bell, and weaved the two together. Then he tied it to her sword, and handed it over. Try activating your spiritual power. Zhu Yao suspiciously picked it up, and the moment she circulated her spiritual energy, the sword was suddenly enveloped by a purple lightning glow. A sword that carried lightning. Chapter 49. Zhu Yao excitedly widened her eyes. This was the 9 heavenly lightning. This way, even if she encountered a demonic beast of a higher rank than her, she would not have to be afraid. Master, you're the best. She was touched. Yuling did not reply, and simply reached out to rub her hair, which was already messy in the first place. Looking at his stupid disciple who was still smiling foolishly, he became even more worried. His disciple was so stupid, yet she still liked to go to dangerous places. She had already lost her little life the last time, and this time, she was even more worried. No, he had to give her more protection. Taisialuk is filled with danger. Your master cannot be by your side, so you have to be more careful. This sword can only be used for attacks, so you have to guard against it. After pondering for a moment, he took out a defensive mystic robe from his storage ring. Wear this. Zhu Yao looked at the dazzling golden mystic robe, and weakly said, Master, this isn't suitable, right? You don't like it? Yu Yan frowned and took out another one. Then this one, there's a defensive formation on it. It can defend against any mystic arts for 15 minutes. This one was no longer dazzling, but it was bright red and purple, as though it was the new year. She did not dare to wear it. You still don't want it? Yu Yan frowned even deeper, and continued to take it out. Then I'll take this one. This one wasn't dazzling, nor was it bright red. But Master, why were there so many gems sewn on it? She wasn't going out to sell some goods. Zhu Yao speechlessly looked at her master, who had already activated River God mode, and then looked at the 3 clothes on the table. She could faintly see the word stupid written on the first one, rich written on the second, and quick snatch written on the third. She was clearly going out to snatch things. She did not want to become a tycoon who was robbed. In the end, under her firm rejection, her master had no choice but to keep the items back with a regretful look. He looked at her with a complicated gaze. His disciple was so stupid, she would definitely be bullied if she went out, right? She definitely would, definitely, right? Zhu Yao could only use rest as an excuse and escape. Having a master who loved to worry, the pressure was huge. Finally, the day of Taisialuk's secret realm opening arrived. Zhu Yao organized a few daily necessities, and prepared to head to the main mountain's plaza to enter the dungeon. Before she left, her master suddenly appeared again. Zhu Yao's heart trembled. She was afraid that he would pull out another shiny object for her to bring along. Fortunately, her master was still reliable this time. He only took out a necklace with a small jade pendant and put it on for her. Remember to carry this with you at all times. You can't let it leave your body, understand? Yu Yan said very seriously, and completely did not look like his usual unreliable self. Zhu Yao instantly felt that this was definitely some sort of incredible mystic artifact. Stuffing it into her chest, she placed it close to her body and patted it a few times. Don't worry, master. As long as the jade is there, the person will be there. Yu Yan's expression, however, was a little strange. He stared at her necklace for a moment, and then, without saying a single word, he turned around and left. Zhu Yao strangely curled her lips and flew away from Jade Forest Mountain on her flying sword. After several years of devilish training, her acrophobia had completely disappeared, and she could finally be a safe birdman. The moment she flew away from the Jade Forest Mountain, Yu Yan had already sensed it. Turning his head to look at the direction his stupid disciple left in, he deeply sighed. As expected, he was still worried. Suddenly, he recalled the scene of his disciple placing the jade tablet on his chest, and his face became somewhat hot. Was it because of the weather? When Zhu Yao arrived at the main mountain, there were already quite a few disciples gathered there. She made a rough count, and there were actually more than 50 of them. It seemed like there were quite a few Azoth stage disciples in the sect. Most of them were in small groups of 5 to 6 people, and after a closer look, they were all disciples of the various mountains standing together. Only the group at the very front was different. There were dozens of people in that group, and actually, there were 4 to 5 female disciples as well. Without exception, their eyes were all flashing with the naked light of adoration, and they were currently surrounding a man, talking to him. That man's face had the bolded word bug on it, and it was impossible for her not to recognize him. As expected, with the protagonist's aura surrounding him, women would instantly turn into someone who would feel uncomfortable if they did not stick to him. Little Bun. Her shoulder was patted, and when Zhu Yao turned around, she just happened to see Wang Shuji. Zhu Yao was startled. Thinking back, it made sense. He had formed his Azoth core as well, so naturally he would go as well. You formed your Azoth core? Wang Shuji was very shocked. In these few years, he did not see anyone forming their Azoth core in Ancient Hill sect. I just returned from my training and formed my Azoth core outside. Zhu Yao casually made up an excuse. She really did not want to mention that basin tribulation. So that's the case. Wang Shuji nodded, and then he asked in shock. You're going to Tasioluk as well? That's right. A secret realm that only opens once every 500 years. Naturally, I can't miss it. But you've just formed your Azoth core. Wang Shuji disagreed a little. Tasioluk is extremely dangerous. It's rumored that even a demigod stage expert might not be completely safe in the center of the secret realm. Why don't you? My master has agreed. Zhu Yao interrupted his words. Wang Shuji did not object to it either. He looked at her a little worriedly, and could not help but remind her. When we enter later, remember to follow closely. Just stay at the outer perimeter. Don't go deep into the center, understand? Was this little wimp showing concern for her? Zhu Yao felt a faint gratification, and could not help but reach out her hand to stroke this man, who was even taller than her. I understand. Senior Marshal Brother Wang. Wang Shuji was startled, and looked at her blankly for a moment. A moment later, he sighed and regained his senses. Pretending to be angry, he lectured. Nonsense. At that moment, he actually thought he saw Big Sister Zhu Yao. As expected, was it because his obsession was too deep? This little junior marshal sister, we meet again. Xiaoyi popped out of nowhere, and his face was filled with ripples as he smiled at her. In an instant, his protagonist's halo was fully activated. Sizing up Zhu Yao for a moment, he said in surprise. Little junior marshal sister, you formed your Azoth core? Ever since he arrived, Wang Shuji's expression had been ugly. Although the knot in his heart had already been resolved, the person he hated still made him hate him. Before Zhu Yao could even react, he had already taken a step forward and forcefully inserted himself in between the two of them. Staring at him with his guard up, he pulled Zhu Yao behind him without a trace. Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao, you're wrong. Your sovereign Feng Yi's personal succeeding disciple. According to seniority, we have to address you as senior martial uncle. How can she possibly be your little junior martial sister? Seniority is just a form of address, I don't mind. Towards Wang Shiji's disturbance, Xiaoyi was a little displeased. Senior martial uncle doesn't mind, but this junior does. Don't even think of using senior martial brothers and junior martial sisters to get close to me. Little Bun was big sister Zhu Yao's junior martial sister. He had to protect her. If other people were to find out about this, they would think that we don't know any etiquette. As expected, Xiao Yi's expression darkened. Although he had always known that Wang Shiji was dissatisfied with him, he never expected that he would come knocking on his door to provoke him. As expected, these so-called inner sect disciples were all reckless. Xiao Yi endured the anger in his heart. Looking at the cute junior martial sister behind him, who had a pair of grape-like eyes, he could not help but soften his tone. Little martial niece, I wonder which mountain you're a disciple of? Chapter 50. As expected, Wang Shiji frowned. It would not be good for him to chase the other party away, and he would not feel at ease if he did so. He could only block in front of Zhu Yao, unable to advance or retreat. Zhu Yao was a little amused as she looked at little Wimp, who was like a mother hen protecting her chick, blocking in front of her. His heart was filled with warmth. He had a feeling that his son had finally grown up and knew how to protect his father. Such a heartwarming little wimp. How could she not give him face? Cuckoo. She faked a few coughs and tried her best to put on an innocent and cute expression, as though she did not understand the affairs of the world. Widening her eyes, she looked straight at Xiao Yi and said, "Who are you?" Xiao Yi. Taesialuk was located in a barren land to the north of the cultivation world. Due to the collapse of spiritual qi, and the fact that there were cliffs and precipitous cliffs everywhere, not to mention mortals, even cultivators didn't often enter. But every 500 years, the entrance to the mystic realm would open. The spirit qi inside was abundant, and spiritual herbs could be found everywhere. Although great opportunities were often accompanied by great dangers, every sect would still send out their elites to search for opportunities. However, only cultivators below the nascent soul stage could enter the secret realm, so every time they entered, they had to be elites of the golden core stage. This was also a very important matter for the sections. Zhu Yao already felt that there were a lot of people in her sect. However, when she arrived at the designated location, she realized that disciples from the various sects and clans had already gathered there. There were even some wandering practitioners as well. The entire mountain was filled with practitioners. Even during the intersect tournament back then, she did not see so many people. She roughly estimated that there were about 1,000 people. The sect's disciples were all led by the sect's nascent soul cultivators. They all wore the same uniform and stood together, making it very easy to recognize them. Itinerant cultivators were basically independent, but there were also groups of 4 or 5 people. This time, Ancient Hill Sect had specially sent the 2 great mountain lords of Weapon Mountain and Talisman Mountain to escort them. Beside the Weapon Mountain Lord, Zi Yuan was a very familiar person. It was actually little Fatty Zhao. She did not expect that he had formed his Azoth core as well. The current little Fatty Zhao had retained his original characteristics and had become Big Fatty Zhao. He didn't know if it was because of his figure, but the arrogant and despotic look he had when he was young had disappeared. Instead, he seemed charmingly naive. He seemed to have something on his mind. He didn't look as excited and eager as the people around him. Zhu Yao had been pulled behind Wang Shiji the entire time, as though he was afraid that she would get lost. Along the way, he had repeatedly told her to stay far away from Xiao Yi, and not to trust him easily. She chattered on and on like an old woman. Here it comes. The crowd suddenly stirred, and for a moment, the scene was exceptionally noisy. Most of them had already raised their heads to look at the sky. They saw that the originally calm sky had suddenly been torn apart by something, revealing a huge crack. It was as if the sky had been split into 2 halves. It was only when the crack grew larger and larger, that it could accommodate more than 10 people at the same time, that it stopped expanding. The people below couldn't wait any longer. One by one they flew into the crack on their swords. However, the ones taking action were all loose cultivators. After all, the disciples of the various sects still cared about etiquette, so they still stood in the same place without moving. A nascent soul stage practitioner walked over, and with a smile, he faced the two leaders of Ancient Hill sect. Esteemed reverends, there are many disciples in Ancient Hill sect. Why don't we proceed first? Ziyuan seemed to have been waiting for these words, and he did not reject either. Turning around, he said to the 50 or so Azoth disciples behind him, "This trip will be dangerous. Everyone remember, do not force yourself to fight. A month later the entrance will be sealed. You must return as soon as possible before the entrance is sealed." The crowd replied in unison. Yes. Ziyuan waved his hands. The disciples summoned their flying swords one after another, and flew towards the entrance. "Be careful, follow me closely." Wang Shuji turned his head and said, as he pulled Zhu Yao, and flew towards the entrance as well. When they entered the entrance, the jade tablet on Zhu Yao's neck flashed for a moment, and then, it immediately returned to its original state. Unfortunately, no one noticed it. After entering, the scene in front of them was once again different. In front of them was a forest that was so vast that one could not even see the end of it. The disciples who entered earlier had already scattered, and there were only a few dozen Ancient Hill sect disciples who had just entered. Zhu Yao, who was used to following groups, naturally flew over as well, only to realize that they were bidding farewell. It seemed like these people had already found a small group in the beginning, and after entering, they had to split up. Zhu Yao, who was left behind, was a little speechless. She pulled Wang Shuji next to her. "Who are we going with?" Wang Shuji pointed to Xiao Yi, who was in front of them, and his expression was a little unhappy. "Master had instructed me to form a group with Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao." Zhu Yao looked at the extremely unwilling Wang Shuji. However, she was a little happy in the depths of her heart. She did not know the true location of the wood spirit, and had only seen in her dreams that Xiao Yi had found it in an ancient ruin. However, the location of that ruin was still unknown. Just now, she was troubled over not having an excuse to follow Xiao Yi. Little Fatty Zhao was the last to enter the secret realm. The moment he landed, he ran towards a green-clothed lady in the crowd. Junior Marshal Sister Lu Cha. His figure was fat in the first place, and when his entire body squeezed, the few disciples at the side were instantly pushed back a few steps. The female practitioner who was called turned her head back, her brows slightly furrowed. However, she still replied him with a courteous smile. "Senior Marshal Brother Zhao." Little Fatty Zhao, however, did not feel anything, and began to chat even more passionately. "Junior Marshal Sister, do you already have a group?" "Why don't?" "Senior Marshal Brother Zhao. I have already decided to form a group with Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao." Before waiting for him to finish, Lu Cha interrupted his words. Without leaving a trace, she took a step back to the side, and stood next to Xiao Yi. "Is that so?" Little Fatty Zhao was momentarily disappointed. Suddenly, he thought of something, and continued. "It's fine. Coincidentally, I have yet to find a group. Why don't I join your group as well?" "Junior Marshal Nephew Zhao." Xiao Yi coldly laughed. The two of them had enmity in the first place, and currently, his voice was even colder. "It's best that you stay with the disciples of Weapon Mountain. Our group has a lot of people. I'm afraid there will be many inconveniences, and we won't be able to take care of you." These words were not only a rejection, they even carried disdain. Little Fatty Zhao's expression stiffened a little. Looking at Lu Cha, who was in front of him, his eyes revealed a hint of infatuation. The anger that was about to explode was once again held back. "Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao, it's fine. I can take care of myself." Since he said it like that, Xiao Yi was unable to reject him, and could only silently agree to him following them. Zhu Yao sighed a little as she watched from the side. Sure enough, the wheel of fortune had turned. When the two of them were still little wimps, Xiao Yi had been bullied by Little Fatty Zhao quite a few times. Now they had actually switched places. However, looking at Little Fatty Zhao's expression, it seemed like he really liked that girl called Lu Cha. Unfortunately, Zhu Yao looked at that girl who was following closely behind Xiao Yi. She could only say that falling flowers yearn for love, but heartless water flows. What are you looking at? Wang Shuji saw that she was shaking her head and sighing at the same time. Chapter 51. He followed her gaze and looked over curiously. Instantly, he understood and explained to her. Little Fatty Zhao is now an advanced disciple of Weapon Peak. His potential isn't bad, but he's too impatient and often uses elixirs to raise his cultivation. Even though he managed to form his core, his realm is still unstable. I wonder why Reverend Zi Yuan allowed him to come to this mystic realm. Then what about the one at the side? Zhu Yao pointed a little curiously at the girl called Lu Cha. That's the chamber disciple of Elixir Peak Lu Cha. She has a fire and earth dual spirit root, and had formed her core a few years earlier than little Fatty Zhao. There was a hint of praise in Wang Shuji's voice. I heard that Elixir Peak's Peak Master has the intention of betrothing her to little Fatty Zhao as his Dao companion. However, he has yet to make it official. From the looks of it, Wang Shuji did not continue, but Zhu Yao already understood. So there was such a thing. No wonder little Fatty Zhao was so attached to her. There were many dual cultivation partners in the sect. Even the sect master had a dual cultivation partner. However, it was said that the sect master had been in seclusion to break through to the nascent soul realm. So she had never seen him. There were a total of 10 people in their group. Including her, there were 5 female cultivators. The leader was a disciple of Elixir Peak called Qin Yi, a golden core perfected cultivator. He counted the number of people, and after confirming that there were no mistakes, he led the way into the forest. Let's go. Zhu Yao pulled Wang Shuji and followed after him. Occasionally, she would pay attention to Xiao Yi, who was in front of them, because he was the wood spirit that he found alone. In other words, when he was alone, would the wood spirit appear? She had to pay close attention to him. Xiaoyi seemed to have sensed her gaze, as he turned his head and gave her a smile which he thought was cool. Zhu Yao instantly choked for a moment, and had almost puked. Honestly, it was not that Xiaoyi was ugly, but as long as he had any expression, the word bug on his face would distort as well. And as a technician, when she saw those 3 words, her first reaction would definitely be to slap a patch on his face, alright? However, because of this smile of his, Zhu Yao instantly sensed killing intent, and it even came from the few female practitioners next to him. The expressions they were looking at her with looked as though they wanted to swallow her whole. Hey, don't misunderstand, alright? I'm really not interested in your privacy. There should be a lot of fresh green grass around here. Let's split up and collect some. We'll gather back here in 2 hours. Chun-Yi took out a map and looked at it for a while before looking at the other 9 people. No one had any objections, so they dispersed. Zhu Yao curiously asked, "Is there a map in the secret realm as well?" "That's a map drawn by a senior who had entered Taesialuk before." Wang Shuji explained, "Every sect has it. Before entering the mystic realm, every disciple with golden core perfection can get a copy from the sect leader. This was also the reason why it was necessary for a disciple with golden core perfection to lead the team. However, there is only a map of the outer region of the pocket dimension. There are many Yao beasts in the central region of the pocket dimension. It is very difficult for cultivators to come out alive. So that was the case. In that case, she temporarily did not have to worry about Xiao Yi finding that ancient ruin. After all, every single sect had this map, and if there were really ruins, they would have long been discovered by others. Let's go over there and take a look." Wang Shuji pointed to a place in the east where there was no one. Fresh green grass was a medicinal ingredient used to refine pellets, and could be used to refine face-retaining pellets. It was not that it did not exist outside, but it was not commonly seen either, so its price was not cheap. However, the secret realm was different. The medicinal herbs here seemed to be growing extremely well. They had only walked for 4 hours, and they had already found 3 stalks. Zhu Yao did not know much about pellet refining, and her master did not allow her to casually consume pellets either. Hence, she was completely a layman when it came to medicinal herbs and the like. If not for Wang Shuji saying that the stalk of grass was fresh green grass, She had almost stepped on it. Wang Shuji carefully dug out a stalk of fresh and tender grass, and then placed it into a special container. He explained to her that spiritual herbs all contain spiritual energy. If they were not placed into a special container, even if they were to be brought out, they would still turn into useless grass due to the loss of spiritual energy. Ju Yao felt a little bored from listening. In the modern era, she was a person who could even raise a cactus to death. She really did not have any love for plants. After looking around for a moment, she was still unable to tell that the lush green grass was a little different. But fortunately, she was a studious child and would always ask when she did not understand. What's that stalk of grass? That's purple moss. It can be used to refine a blood-nourishing pellet. What's that stalk of grass? That's flowing grass. It's a common grass, and it can stop blood flow. What about that stalk of grass? That's a must. It's extremely poisonous when consumed. What about that stalk of grass over there? That really is grass. Wang Shuji's head ached a little from the questions. Wasn't this supposed to be basic knowledge for beginners? Why didn't she even know about medicinal herbs? Did Ancestral Grand Master really know how to teach disciples? Little Bun, can you be quiet for a moment? That stalk of grass you plucked is fresh green grass. Oh. Zhu Yao silently retracted her ignorant claws and suddenly, her eyes shone. Hey, Shuji, I have one last question. What? Wang Shuji speechlessly turned around. Zhu Yao weakly pointed to the front. That stalk of grass, why is it glowing? Wang Shuji turned around to take a look, and her eyes instantly widened. Not far in front of them, there was a large patch of grass that was flashing with silvery white light. The leaves were translucent, and they looked crystal clear. From afar, it looked as though the ground was covered with a layer of glass. The two of them walked closer. Wang Shuji carefully inspected it for a moment, and then excitedly said, This is penetrating leaf grass. And it's such a large patch. The see-through leaf grass was an essential ingredient to concoct a foundation-building pellet. And the foundation-building pellet was an extremely rare pellet as well. Even in Ancient Hills sect, not every essence practitioner paragon could obtain a foundation-building pellet. Only a few extremely difficult missions would reward them with this item. Although he was already an Azoth core and did not need it, such a large patch of penetrating leaf grass, to Ancient Hills sect, meant that there would be a large number of essence practitioners who could build their foundation. Penetrating leaf grass? This name sounded so familiar, as though she had heard it somewhere before. What's this grass used for? This is a medicinal ingredient for refining foundation pellets. Wang Shuji excitedly took out a box, planning to harvest it. Wait a minute. Zhu Yao grabbed onto her hand. Are you talking about the Heavenly Pulse Lotus Companion Grass, penetrating leaf grass? Wang Shuji was taken aback. She thought for a moment before nodding. I've indeed heard that the see-through leaf grass is accompanied by the Skypulse lotus, but no one has ever found the Skypulse lotus beside the see-through leaf grass. Zhu Yao finally recalled where she had heard of the see-through leaf grass. It was the Medicine Mountain Lord Hong Cho, who had coincidentally mentioned it to her. She was the Medicine Mountain Lord, so naturally, she was extremely familiar with medicinal herbs. At that time, her body was not even 1 year old, and her spiritual root could not be seen at all. Even if he had a 5 elements mixed spirit root, he would still find a heavenly pulse lotus that could cleanse meridians, and help her cleanse a good spirit root. Moreover, he would also be able to harvest the companion grass and see-through leaf grass. And he would also be able to contribute to the sect. When translated into human language, it would be, plucking a heavenly pulse lotus would result in a pile of see-through leaf grass. Chapter 52. You're saying that there might be a heaven pulse lotus here? Wang Shuji's expression was somewhat grave, as he looked at the large patch of see-through leaf grass in front of him. Although the heavenly pulse lotus, which could cleanse meridians and reshape meridians, only existed in legends, and no one had ever seen it before, the see-through leaf grass was extremely rare. However, the air in this place was moist, and there were so many see-through leaf grass growing strangely, and each one of them was full of vitality. Perhaps there really was a pond with strange treasures growing in front of them. As long as there were rare treasures, apart from the accompanying grass, there would also be accompanying demonic beasts. In other words, there was at least one 6th-ranked demonic beast here. And it might even be a group. Let's go back first and discuss with senior brother Chen Yi whether we should go in and investigate. Wang Xuji put away the box containing the spiritual grass. Her face was no longer as excited as before. Instead, it was somewhat solemn. No matter what, a 6th-ranked demonic beast was equivalent to a late-stage Azoth practitioner. One of them was an early-stage Azoth practitioner, while the other was an early-stage Azoth practitioner. If they were to encounter a 6th-ranked demonic beast, even if they didn't die, they would still lose a layer of skin. Moreover, their spirit veins did not need to be cleansed in the first place, so the Heaven Pulse Lotus was not very meaningful to them. But before they could return to the gathering point, they bumped into someone. It was little Fatty Zhao's sweetheart, Wuxia. She was walking very leisurely, almost breaking into a jog. When she saw the two of them, she was stunned, as though she was trying to hide something. She looked around for a while, before nodding her head as a greeting. "Junior sister Lu, what's wrong?" Wang Xuji asked casually. Her face paled and she forced a smile. "No, nothing. I just encountered a demonic beast. Senior brother Xiao has already taken care of it. I was just about to inform senior brother Chen." Zhu Yao, however, grew even more suspicious, as she turned to look at the direction she came from. "You guys can't have entered the place filled with see-through leaf grass, right?" Lu Cha's face turned even paler, looking as if her thoughts had been guessed. Suddenly, a loud roar came from not far away, resounding through the clouds. The three of them could not help but feel dizzy, and even the ground started to shake. "It's the sound of a demonic beast." Wang Xuji's eyes were filled with reproach as she looked at Lu Cha. Both of them were well aware of what she was thinking. Earlier, she was walking together with Xiao Yi, and the two of them must have seen that patch of see-through leaf grass from the other side, and they had even entered it. However, she did not expect that they had startled the life companion demonic beast inside. Xiao Yi was no match for it, hence, he had her come out to look for help. However, she did not want too many people to find out, hence, she did not tell them. Just from that roar, that demonic beast was definitely not simple. Sure enough, not long after, they heard the rumbling sound of running. Even the birds and beasts on the trees fled in all directions. Something was chasing them. Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao? Lu Cha looked towards the direction of the voice anxiously, as though she just realized the severity of the matter. "Let's inform the others. Hurry." Zhu Yao summoned her flying sword, pulled Wang Xuji who was at the side, and signaled for Lu Cha to follow her with her eyes. Only after flying into the sky did she see, on the ground not far away, a gigantic beast that was even larger than a house was currently running towards them. The three of them flew at top speed, and finally arrived at the gathering point after much difficulty. Chen Yi and the other martial brothers were already standing below. What happened? Chen Yi realized the situation was amiss as well, and hurriedly ran over. Wang Xuji walked forward, and explained the situation to the others. Before he could even finish, he suddenly heard another roar, and Zhu Yao simply felt a gigantic shadow enveloping towards her. "Little Bun!" Wang Xuji anxiously shouted, as he looked at the direction behind her with a deathly pale face. Only then did Zhu Yao slowly turn her head a little stiffly, facing a gigantic beast head. It looked like a bear, yet, it was covered in scales, and there were even 3 horns that looked like steel blades on its head. It paused for a moment, and then, it suddenly opened its mouth towards her, revealing a mouthful of teeth that were even longer than her legs. Then it stuck out its tongue, and licked her. Zhu Yao, whose body was covered in saliva, that she wasn't being Qi Ling. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. The other female cultivators present were all frightened by the sudden appearance of the demonic beast. A shrill scream rang out. It was unknown who it was, but a huge fireball was summoned and thrown over. Just as Zhu Yao was about to be burnt, Wang Xuji rushed over in time, and rolled away. The demonic beast seemed to have been angered by that fireball earlier, as it roared and charged towards the crowd. Everyone had no choice, but to summon their weapons one after another to fight. Various mystic arts were thrown towards the demonic beast. Wang Xuji supported Zhu Yao up, summoned his sword as well, and blocked in front of her. Zhu Yao looked at the violent demonic beast at the center. She did not know if it was a misconception, but she felt that the demonic beast earlier did not want to kill her. Just as she was thinking about it, the demonic beast spat out a fireball, and just happened to fly towards her direction. Zhu Yao dodged it, and when she turned to look at the place she was standing at earlier, it had already turned into a pit of fire. Alright, she was now certain that it wanted to kill her. Fire beast. Chun-Yi looked at the demonic beast at the center with extreme astonishment. The fire beast was a very mystical demonic beast. It was of the fire attribute, yet, it liked to stay near water sources. Hence, it was immune to both water and fire. It was a 5th-ranked demonic beast when it was born, and when it matured, it would be 6th-ranked. She had to admit that Chun-Yi did have some talent for leadership. After recognizing this demonic beast, he loudly reminded everyone, "Don't use fire and water-type mystic arts. The fire beast is immune to both water and fire." When everyone heard this, they hurriedly stopped their fire and water-type mystic arts and switched to other mystic arts. Some had even directly flew forward and used their sword techniques. Among everyone, Wang Xuji's sword techniques were the strongest. He himself was charging at the very front, and his sword techniques were airtight, preventing the demonic beast from advancing even an inch. This is a 5th-ranked demonic beast. Chun-Yi was overjoyed, and only then did he realize that this was a young beast. Although a mature fire beast was equivalent to an Azoth paragon, a 5th-ranked demonic beast would at most be at the intermediate stages of Azoth. Even if demonic beasts were innately stronger than human practitioners, with so many people, it was more than enough to take down this young beast. Zhu Yao wanted to help as well, but other than Wang Xuji, no one else knew that she was a disciple of Jade Forest Mountain, and it was inconvenient for her to summon her sword as well. She could only do the same as the other female practitioners, and stand at a place slightly further away. Occasionally, she would cast a binding art, and restrict the demonic beast's movements. Chun-Yi's guess was right. This was a young beast, and was basically unable to take on everyone's attacks. Not even a moment later, that demonic beast had already fallen onto the ground. It was slashed by his sword, and fresh red beast blood flowed all over the ground. The crowd cheered, and heaved sighs of relief. Chun-Yi counted the number of people, and realized that other than 3 disciples who suffered some light injuries, the rest were fine. Just what happened? Chun-Yi asked Wang Xuji. Earlier, when he heard the words "there was a demonic beast," he saw this demonic beast. Behind Wang Xuji was Lu Cha. Lu Cha's expression changed, and then she slowly said, "Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao, Senior Marshal Brother Zhao. And I discovered a lot of see-through leaf grass over there. However, for some reason, this demonic beast suddenly charged out. We were no match for it, so we had no choice but to return to inform you guys." "Then what about Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao and Junior Marshal Brother Zhao?" Chun-Yi continued to ask. Lu Cha's face paled, as though she had only just realized this problem. Logically speaking, the demonic beast had already been killed by them, so the 2 of them should have returned as well. Could it be, before the crowd could even think about it carefully, that could it be, descended from the sky just like that? The first to land on the ground was little fatty Zhao, who was covered in blood. His abdomen seemed to have been stabbed by something, and blood was currently flowing out. His white robe had already been dyed the color of blood. Before everyone could check what happened, suddenly, a wall of fire descended from the sky and sprayed towards the crowd. The 2 injured disciples did not manage to dodge in time, and had already turned into ashes. With a loud rumble, a gigantic demonic beast, that looked exactly the same as the demonic beast earlier, yet was 3 times its size, was already standing in front of the crowd. A huge stench of blood filled everyone's mouth and nose, and there were still flames that had not been extinguished in time in its mouth. Xiaoyi landed as well, and his entire body was in a sorry state. Although his injuries were not as severe as little fatty Zhao's, there were still quite a few small wounds on his body. The moment that large Fire beast landed, it saw the little Fire beast that was already lying at the side. Throwing aside the crowd, it anxiously sprinted over, and using the horn on its head, it lightly touched its corpse. As though it had already realized that it was already dead, it let out a sorrowful whimper. It seemed like this was a mother beast. Zhu Yao's heart could not help but tighten. This couldn't be that little Fire beast's mother, right? As expected, after the large Fire beast whimpered for a long while, it suddenly let out a mournful roar. Turning its head, it looked at the human practitioners on the ground with even more fury. Its claws forcefully scratched the ground, opened its mouth, and spat out a ball of flames that was even bigger than before. Not good, hurry and dodge. Chun Yi, who was currently helping little Fatty Zhao to stop his bleeding, shouted loudly. As though everyone had just awoken from a dream, they quickly flew up on their flying swords. Wherever the flames reached, it had already turned into ashes. Evidently, it was 100 times stronger than that little Fire beast earlier. Lu Cha raised her hand and summoned a gigantic icicle, which flew towards the demonic beast. The moment the icicle came into contact with the demonic beast, it immediately formed a large piece of ice, attempting to freeze the demonic beast and restrict its movements. However, the demonic beast's speed was extremely fast, and the moment the icicle covered it, it immediately shook it off. When the other female practitioner saw this, she materialized countless spiritual swords and attacked the demonic beast's surroundings. Although they were unable to penetrate the demonic beast's scales, they had still indirectly increased the speed of the ice freezing. Just as the demonic beast was about to be completely frozen, the Fire beast suddenly let out a loud roar, and the scales on its body began to stand up one after another. With a whoosh, a large piece of fire was emitted from the scales, and as though its entire body was set ablaze, the ice on its body was instantly melted completely. Mutated Fire beast, Chun-Yi exclaimed. Before the crowd could even react, that Fire beast whose entire body was emitting flames suddenly disappeared. Not far away, however, a miserable cry sounded out. The female practitioner who used spiritual swords to attack it earlier was already bitten by the Fire beast. The moment its mouth closed, that female practitioner's miserable cry suddenly stopped, and only fresh red blood slowly flowed out from the demonic beast's mouth. Chapter 53. We can't beat it. There were already people in the crowd who had the intention to retreat. 2 female practitioners had already summoned their flying swords, turned around, and were planning to flee for their lives. Don't move. Chun-Yi was just about to stop them, but in the end, he was not in time. With a leap, that demonic beast instantly disappeared. A moment later, it appeared in front of the 2 female practitioners who were fleeing for their lives, and spat out a ball of flames from its mouth. The 2 of them did not even have the time to scream, as they had already turned into ashes. It seemed like this mother beast had already been enraged, and would not let anyone here go. Zhu Yao clenched her fists, and tried her best to suppress the fear in the depths of her heart. Taking the opportunity when the demonic beast was spitting out flames, she cast a wood-type mystic art, materialized countless vines, and bound the demonic beast's 4 limbs. The demonic beast did not notice for a moment, and was dragged onto the ground. Now, Zhu Yao loudly said, we can't let it teleport to another place. Out of the 10-man team, only Zhu Yao, Wang Xuji, Lu Cha, Xiao Yi, and the injured little Fatty Zhao were left. Earlier, its speed was extremely fast, and just by looking at it, it looked as though it ran over. However, Zhu Yao realized, it basically did not have any sprinting movements. It was not that its speed was fast, but this Fire beast knew how to teleport. Wang Xuji and Xiao Yi were the first to react. One after another, they materialized their sword intents, and attacked towards the demonic beast. The sword intents that only Azal stage practitioners could comprehend could not be compared to spiritual swords. The sword intents carried the user's strong will, and with a single slash, the Fire beast was already bleeding. The Fire beast seemed to have become even more furious, and began to struggle with all its might. Zhu Yao gradually felt a little powerless. How could just a few vines bind this 7th-ranked demonic beast for a long period of time? Lucha, Zhu Yao shouted to the person at the side who was still in a daze. Hurry and help. Lucha was startled, as she hurriedly raised her hand and summoned an icicle. The hell? Don't use ice. Zhu Yao could not help but curse out. This lady must have forgotten to bring her brain with her when she left home. Unfortunately, it was already too late. That icicle had already charged straight towards the demonic beast. The moment it came into contact with the demonic beast's body, the flames on the Rise-Fire beast's body instantly surged, and the vines she painstakingly summoned were completely burnt. The Rise-Fire beast's figure flashed, and had already appeared behind Lu Cha while spewing out flames. Lu Cha instantly widened her eyes. Her face had already turned deathly pale, her eyes filled with despair. The Rise-Fire beast had already opened its mouth to bite down, but suddenly, a blood-colored figure suddenly charged out, knocked Lu Cha away, and took her place to be bitten. It was little Fatty Zhao. Even Zhu Yao was dumbfounded. However, this was not the time to be in a daze. With her fastest speed, Zhu Yao flew over, pulled up Lu Cha, who was already scared silly on the ground, and hurriedly distanced herself from the Rise-Fire beast. Little Fatty Zhao didn't even have time to look at Lu Cha before he was cut into two. Lu Cha, who had been rescued, still had a terrified look on her face. She didn't even dare to turn her head to look at little Fatty Zhao, who had already died without a complete corpse. She was so scared that her tears flowed out uncontrollably, and her entire body was trembling. In the end, Zhu Yao could not help but raise her hand and give her a slap. Are you a motherfucking idiot? Don't you know that Rise-Fire beasts are impervious to fire and water? Just did she know why she was unable to freeze the demonic beast earlier? I used ice. Lu Cha replied, feeling wronged. Ice is also water, idiot. She clearly knew that it was her ice that had forced the Rise-Fire beast out of its flames earlier. Yet she still dared to release her ice over. You must be a freaking monkey sent by a clown. Zhu Yao was no longer in the mood to educate a brain-damaged child. Summoning her flying sword, she once again cast a defensive barrier on herself and warned the others. Everyone set up a defensive barrier. The Rise-Fire beast can still flash. Right now, she could no longer care about hiding her identity. She had to save her own life first. This time, Lu Cha did not go into a daze, and obediently placed down a barrier. Zhu Yao silently glanced at little Fatty Zhao on the ground, and suddenly felt a little sad for him. The moment she circulated her spiritual energy, Zhu Yao's sword was instantly filled with purple lightning bolts. Without any hesitation, she flew up and slashed towards that demonic beast. That demonic beast's scales are extremely sturdy. You won't be able to cut. Before Chun-Yi could even finish his warning, the demonic beast let out a miserable cry. With a bang, it was slashed onto the ground by Zhu Yao's sword, and blood was flowing out from a palm-sized wound on its body. Junior Sister Steamed Bun, you? The hell was Junior Marshall Sister Steamed Bun? Zhu Yao glared at him, and suddenly recalled that she seemed to have never told them her name. Wang Xuji did not ask either, and simply kept calling her Little Steamed Bun. They couldn't have thought that her name was Steamed Bun, right? The corner of Zhu Yao's lips twitched, as she turned around and seriously dealt with the demonic beast. That strike earlier was purely a coincidence. Most probably, even the demonic beast did not know that her sword contained lightning that was specialized in restraining demonic beasts, which was why she managed to injure it. She would not be so lucky next time. As expected, the demonic beast on the ground disappeared again. Zhu Yao's heart clenched, as she did not know where it would appear next. Little Steamed Bun, are you all right? Wang Xuji flew over, and stood with his back against hers. You injured it, so it will definitely attack you first. Be careful. As expected, in the next moment, the demonic beast appeared above her head, and pounced towards them with its bloody mouth wide open. However, it bit onto the defensive barrier and blocked it. It was the sword tassel her master gave her, which blocked this fatal blow. She would not be so lucky next time. Zhu Yao and Wang Xuji hurriedly retreated, while Chen-Yi and Xiao-Yi rushed over as well. Xiao Yi's sword intent had already been trained to a very proficient level. A golden sword surrounded his surroundings, as though it had a life of its own. It emitted out a piercingly cold sword aura. However, the demonic beast did not face them head-on. Instead, its figure flashed, and it once again disappeared. We have to force it out. Chunyi clenched his fists. Most probably, this demonic beast wanted to exhaust them to death. Although they could use their own defensive barrier, it could only defend against a single attack. If it were to attack a few more times, none of them would be able to withstand it. I have a way to force it out. Zhu Yao raised her own sword and said. Everyone seemed to have only just realized the lightning glow on her sword, especially Chunyi. You're a disciple of Jade Forest Mountain? Zhu Yao did not deny it either. In any case, they would find out sooner or later. From what I see, even if that demonic beast were to appear in a flash, it shouldn't exceed a radius of 5 kilometers. I will use lightning to force it out, but I only have 3 breaths of time. The 3 of you must kill it within this period of time. The expressions of the 3 of them were a little solemn. Even if they managed to force the demonic beast out, it was after all, a 7th-ranked existence, an existence at the early stages of nascent soul. With just 3 Azoth practitioners like them, they were afraid. We have to at least try. Unexpectedly, the one who agreed was Xiao Yi. Junior Martial Sister Steamed Bun will force the demonic beast out, and we will use our full strength to attack it. Steamed Bun, your sister. After the few of them finished their discussion, they moved into a formation on the ground. Lu Cha awkwardly moved over as well, and stood in the middle of the 4 of them. Zhu Yao pouted, and did not bother about her. Stabbing the long sword in her hand into the ground, she held onto the sword hilt with a single hand, circulated the lightning spiritual energy in her body, and activated the lightning guiding art towards the ground. The ground, which was still calm earlier, began to emit lightning glow with the long sword as the center, and it was rapidly expanding in all directions. In just a moment, it had already filled a radius of 5 kilometers. Zhu Yao focused her attention, and no longer continued to expand outwards. Instead, she began to directly attract lightning. In an instant, countless lightning sparks flashed from the ground into the sky. Like growing branches and leaves, they extended straight towards the sky, and as far as the eye could see, it was filled with white lightning sparks. With a long roar, a gigantic beast appeared in the sky above them. Its entire body was covered with lightning, and it seemed to be struggling in extreme pain. It's out! Chunyi immediately materialized countless spiritual swords and attacked towards the demonic beast. Xiao Yi and Wang Xuji did not hesitate either, circulated the spiritual energy in their bodies and attacked. Zhu Yao reduced the output of her spiritual energy and shrunk the range of the lightning sparks, allowing them to only surround the surroundings of that demonic beast and restrict its movements. The few attacks were finally effective, and that demonic beast's body was already filled with wounds. However, this was still not enough to obtain victory. Xiao Yi's expression turned cold. The sword intent, which was still a small sword earlier, suddenly turned into countless sharp blades and attacked towards the demonic beast in an airtight manner. Zhu Yao was stunned. Such a strong sword intent, as expected of someone who had activated his protagonist's cheat. His leveling speed was really fast. Her lightning sparks had already disappeared. This large-scale lightning guiding art could only be maintained for 3 breaths of time. Any longer, and she would not be able to hold on. However, looking at it now, Xiao Yi's sword intent could achieve the same effect as well. Zhu Yao powerlessly sat on the ground and could only occasionally replenish a few lightning sparks during the gaps between their attacks. That demonic beast was evidently no longer a match for them, as it could no longer control its body, and fell from the sky. Now! Chunyi shouted out loudly. Xiao Yi and Wang Xuji simultaneously condensed 2 gigantic sword intents, and immediately attacked towards the demonic beast. Seeing that victory was in sight, the Rai Fire beast was already heavily injured, and it was definitely unable to dodge this sword intent. It suddenly let out a loud roar, and its 2 blood-stained eyes instantly emitted out a red glow. The flames on its body suddenly began to rise explosively, and the flames actually turned from red to black. Even Xiao Yi and Wang Xuji's sword intents were dispersed by the flames. The two of them puked out a mouthful of blood. The sword intense backlash. Earlier, they had exerted a great amount of strength, and the current backlash was as severe as it was. Currently, most likely, they no longer had the strength to move. It's trying to forcefully level up. Chun-Yi stared at that demonic beast with a face of disbelief, and the surrounding spiritual energy had already begun to riot. If a demonic beast were to forcefully level up, it would definitely cause the spiritual energy to riot. If the demonic beast succeeded in leveling up, it would attract tribulation lightning, and if it failed, the demonic beast would self-destruct and die. Was this Fire beast planning to perish together with them? What should we do? With a pale expression, Lu Cha looked at the demonic beast whose entire body was burning with black flames. Her face was filled with tears, and she tightly grabbed onto Xiao Yi at the side. Senior Marshal Uncle Xiao, are we unable to leave? I don't want to die here. Xiao Yi did not reply, and even Wang Shuji and Chun-Yi had turned silent. They were currently at the center of the spiritual energy riot. Putting aside the fact that the two of them were heavily injured, and basically did not have the spiritual energy to fly their swords away, even if they were completely unharmed, with such a huge spiritual energy riot, they would not have the strength to leave either. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.